Any questions?
So I understand the concept of cultivating love and compassion, but in my day-to-day life, I'm busy with work. I'm very focused on getting tasks done, and I don't just automatically have this big loving feeling towards everyone and every day, every moment, because I'm like focused on getting things done and picking up my kids from school and all this and that. And is there any tips or techniques that you would suggest for me to remember to do it? Or to have that feelings of them. Also, I work from home, so I'm usually alone in the house the whole day.
Yine yang so samni je kom kona dapat kom thoge yomar dapat samni degi yomar kaisena ti tuje yomar ngos lega top ko yorwa mu pugo ta ko yor lega che ko yor teni dapat samni kom ge yomar teni moran ta nang benam mo nang la degi tok lega che tok chi po degi tok teni yang samni dapat kom ge yomar ta tine ina kan che ore
Pay boyore tela. Then tapsi pay boyores.
tapsi.
Then la jeta pay boyore tapsi boyores tela.
tapsi khare ya pore.
Tal sabi yangi.
Ane. Kerang tapsi ya boyores, morang tapsi ya pore.
Morang tapsi ya boyores sampai hinji gomya. Chirang lega de pay boyores nang lega leya. Pugutan ta chi chirang name chi de samno ta ya lega chi de samno ta. Ta tela tine tine sampai hinji chi tapsi ya boyores.
So you have a great way actually to practice love and compassion, because you're alone at home, which is good, and then you also have to take care of your children, and care for them and your family, and then also that's an excellent method to cultivate love and compassion.
Tela Dorzin Rinpoche ke namju karesung kundu sina teni ngarang ke nama tang teni chi nang ke pugu ta tedala nga tsok chi ta zimpa yore zimpa te teni nga tsok ta ta tela chi chakpa ten zimpa goni teni nga tsok ta kurang tsol pinto ke leka mangpo ji yore teni te yapo re song teni nga tsu sem te teks chi yoba tang na teni te san chup sem ke leka nan ro yore pe na nga ke tsewa te yona kurang tsol yapo yona samba ke lo te teni kurang tsol nga ke kang to pe na nga ke nang tsang ma zoya pe na nga ke sama zoya kari yina te da tham ki kurang tsol yapo yona kurang tsol shimbo yona ta tenji ji ki nga ke ko nong ke teni leka che yapo yona te tsama teni san chup sem nan ro yore song dos.
So, for example, Jetsun Rinpoche always also tells us that when we take care of our children and our family, if we just we have to care for them. So, if we just change some way of thinking, it becomes a great bodhisattva activity. Because to begin with, naturally, we of course we love our children and we want to care for them. So we do cling to them in this way. But then if we change this some aspect in our mind. And use it as a practice, then actually it becomes a practice of cultivating bodhicitta, bodhisattva practice. And whatever you do at home, so then, for example, you clean your house or you cook food for them, you want them to be comfortable in the house, or you want them to eat good food and things like that. So you have the intention to care for them so that they are well and happy. And so if you have this intention, without then the aspect of grasping, then actually it all becomes a bodhisattva activity.
Ta te nga ke samlo ta ki bu ke teni jowa chi ta ya ma to go ma des. Ta nga ke khwan so le ya pu shu bi chi ke yore. Ta te nga ke zin pa ta chak pa ke go ne che de ba yin na. Teni tele teni khwan so ke nga la ya pu chi ya ke rewa chi yore. Te yu ne zong de ta ko dan zin na ro ne teni te ta san chu sen na ro yo ma des. Ta te nga ke le jum de yakpo ji shi yo na teni ta khran so nga la yakpo che ja no ma che ja no nge khran so je se ja ta yakpo hyu ji yong go sam ne ku nong te ke teni le ka che de na te ko chama san chu sem ro chirang pe na khran so sama ju na ya san chu sem ri chirang une le ka le ko re o chirang ke khran so du lo tu na ya te ya san chu sem yin phing ke le ri tele lo chiba sanju sim ko lega yimba yo mares.
So then there's this one thing that we need to change, while we care for our family, our children, and that is the attachment, the grasping that we have for them. And because even though we care for them, we do good for them, we do good things, still we do grasp at them, and if there is a self-grasping involved in our good activities, in our good actions, then we might have some hopes that maybe if I am nice to them now, if I care for them now, then in the future they will be nice to me, or will get something in return for that. And also there is some string attached from your own side when there's grasping. So if you change that and you release the grasping and you really do these things and you care for them out of great love, then actually the activities become, it turns into bodhicitta, bodhisattva activities. And so then it doesn't matter what you do, whatever you do for them, whether you wash their clothes or you cook a meal for them, whatever you do then, all these ordinary things, if you do it without any grasping, but really understanding the workings of karma and practicing according to the Dharma, then whatever you do just naturally becomes an activity of the bodhisattvas, and then apart from that there is no other bodhisattva activity.
Okay. Tangan so nipa chu lamden roas lo chusen roa chu lamden roas ta chu lamden roa la tini ngan so chu penna ngan so jiktin ki leka chi dugu yo na 총지 지랑 게 저기 요나 치랑 게 총대 지 캡상 유야 미여티 존에 총대 자네 총대 저기 요레스 드니 캡상 유야라 치랑 게다 랑과 탑시 만어버 때니 드니 치랑 게 총지 안에 탑유 총대 포시게 요레스 치랑 탑시 노요이나 총대 포트베요 말레스 베티나 이리다 항안소 추 람든 로아세 탈톡 미요테 가르종 거르세나 탈톡 미요테 랑에 추 냠는 땅 롭종스야테 심지 탐지 산지지 공방 토비야 대치디 인삼 디코농 대때니 땡가 좋겠다 주대 냠는 땅 롭종스인 거리 대세 팔라테네 티니 가나서 라마노바 차거요 라마노바 차팔라테네 티니 데브 마노바 산지지 공방 토보요레스 드네 대마인바 땅 가나서 지 담배추다 램제랑 하나 이치 유장 드네 체스마 다 체스마 드네 나랑 깨왔스마지 나랑 지 럼주 마탄다 데바 제 카디 완탕 톰저 쳔보 다 든딜 미여제네 나서 추드바이나 드네 람 논도고요레서 데 텔라 땅 가나서 람 로추선로와 추 람든로와 디에다 마인바 람데 노리온 거요레서 다데 람데 따부 삼노 데 따부 삼노 데다 도고 당하는 제와 스마야 보유냐게 삼노데 유나들이 담배추 트진 접시해요 말에 데데 람노와 인디 텔처 도고요레스 다 텔 도고나 데 님보데 가레리세나 데 님보데 당하는소 데니 체스마 라 신진 차대요다 토리기 대와래 신진 차대요 토리 대와 톰도 그 로지엔데 데니 데이터 미과 종용 미과 데이터 종용 아니나 데니 마양게지 톱적은 제베 톱이야게 데니 람데 노인데 데니 되게 임포텔라 데니 마양 소치 코브 동아 신 코브 동아데 따라 유 임바데 가지 화고고레스 너는 마양 소치 코완데 임포요 말레스 코완데 뺀난 가나 라게 동아요레 멀메 동아요레 냐발라 냐로 동아요 예다요 테인데 로아도 참고 동아레 라신 동아레 만데베인지 데네 텔레 타로 탑라 데네 마수삼노 땅고요레 텔레 삼노 마타마이나 람노 텔레 타와 타 탐진치 부 공판 토버시발라 데네 맥바이나 데네 가나서 람마노바 차고요레소.
So coming back to the teachings, we have said, we've talked about the mind turning towards the Dharma, and then now we are at the second point, the Dharma becoming the path. And so, for example, how the Dharma becomes the path is, to give a worldly example, if you, for example, have a business, and then your goal is to be successful, to have a profit from your business. So if you follow your strategy unmistakably, then you will end up successful. But if you make a lot of mistakes along the way, then you will not be successful. So in the same way, it is the way we set our intention, our mind, when we practice the Dharma, and then that determines whether the Dharma becomes the path. So we practice the Dharma, we study the Dharma with the goal here to bring all sentient beings to attain enlightenment, for all beings. So if that is our intention when we practice and study the Dharma, then our path is unmistaken. It's an unmistaken strategy. And so then as a result of that, according to that path, we will attain enlightenment. And on the other hand, if we do not follow this path so accurately, even if we believe in the Dharma and in karma, cause and effect, then still we might have some other goals in our mind, like wealth and riches and power and might in future lifetimes and so on. And then our practice will be flawed. And in this way, the Dharma will not become the path. So if we think about any future, if you have any future hopes whenever we practice the Dharma, then our path has become flawed. And that flawed intention must be, this is what we need to eliminate by applying an antidote. Because otherwise we are attached. We cling to this life and we cling to the future lives and the happiness in future lives. We want to be born in the higher realms in the future. And if that is our intention, then we will not follow the correct path. And so in order to turn away from this intention, we need to contemplate the suffering nature of samsara altogether. And so even though we are in the midst of samsaric suffering, we also need to recognize it as such. And especially recognize that samsara has really no essence. There is suffering in any kind of birth. Even as a god, there is suffering. And for humans, there is suffering. For hell beings and hungry spirits, in all of the 6 realms in samsara, there is really only suffering. So we need to find a way to become liberated from samsara altogether. And that should be our intention. If that is not our intention, then the path Dharma will not become the path. Then it will be flawed. So for the Dharma to become, for the path to become the Dharma then, or the Dharma become the path, so then we need to have the intention to set our mind towards the perfect enlightenment.
Tene tan roa rik tu de tene ko dongach rayin ta ko dongana na de yores. Ne kap nga chu ta de pa yana dongha mi pan ro ji ri te hla da ma su dongha mi pan ro yore te yin na yang khona dongana na yu ndi ji jin jing che yang yana de ga na tene dongha de yu kha ri de yores. Tene nyarwan ro chi cha ya pa yana tene nyawa na ko sabjang 사장 쪽색이 동안을 코란을 냐와 코란을 동안 산지 맞혀버려요. 여다로 차이나 여다 찌공게 동안을 다 사야던 통념이 동안요 그래. 든로라고 제나더니 루몽 꼬주스네 인제더니 왕워드스네 꼬주스야 라소바다 든저게 동안요래. 라마이나 드는 탑주게 동안 따발 마토 요에 자야게 동안요래. 드는 라라 포동게 동안 드는 코란 든저게 다 동안 코나 르쪽라 동하 코나들로 소소 만다 르쪽 만다 와들 동하 만다와 또 연구여래. 근데 냐로 동하로 오지 시에나 뱀송로 오지 가서 슈반에는 냐로 동하를 가리지 요래서나 단냐와 sabjang chopse sende penna ngarang chu mechik la ngarang chu zukbonda tani tendejin sungsha nongpo ke tani be semo tabne tendejin ngarang chu tarsoma ina dongha kache yusari nyabu dongha ne tele janjir je che yore so pe tende songdo penna mechik la tani tepjik ta tani dong jasmja taba ina madle dongha kache yusari 냐부 동화 답 될 책이래 송요래 된적이 동화요래 되네 단냐로 차부 동화 센데 차부 동화는 딱고 무슨 때네 조 생도 거라 조 생도 거라 되네 될라다 동화 같이 요사래 빼는 나랑 속 락반다고 쳤사오지 양은 매라고 지금 나는 가서 딱 인포지가 막 쭉송아이나 초와 간지 요사래 다 장어 동화 센데 양 빼티나 이래 장화기 나로라 산지 마차파 깨찍찍라 까마 까차카히 지나네 그런 짜 그런 쇼트비야 장모지 나로라 마서 라빠나 쭉소나 라빠 그런 끼지잖아 현도야 근데 그 장모지 난 쭉소나 마서 다지 개도로 개는 파생도라 대저 나오지 나는 마서 쭉소나 동화 간지 요사래 근데 냐마나 다때 무슨 동화데 요래스 대답다 동화데 용거 요래스 냐로 동화스 냐바 사정 좁세게 동화스 다 여다로 지는 띠고게 동화스 이거 띠고게 동화 띠곰 세나 나란소 샤마질 사야다 통야미나 주투고 만도 나란소 삼세 흉내 되게 여러와 되니 갑래 같이 지도 눈차 찍라 가서 사마미나 간리 유사리 여다 히바데게 로 자타 똥차 멈차만 볼 것도 사마라고요 말해 되니 코란스 셈나 또한테 띠곰 마시게 나들 난 된지게 동하나나 대대요 이는 양 코란스 레 마제바 인도 지와 롬 멈차다 로 사야만 볼 된지네 거기 동하나 내노요 그 레드 마저 처리 쉬어요 말해 거기 동하나나 대고요 된지지 동하 산지 마차봐요 되니
So all of the 6 realms in samsara has only the nature of suffering. And sometimes temporarily it might seem to us that there is not so much suffering for example, us gods and humans. But we are still not free from suffering even if there is no suffering, because it only takes a certain condition to arise, and then it all changes into suffering. So we are certainly vulnerable to experience suffering. Whenever anything comes up, then we will suffer again, even if we don't suffer at the moment. And then, of course, there's the lower realms. There's the hell realm, where the beings experience the intense suffering of heat and cold and being burned and boiled and so on. And then the suffering of hungry spirits, which is suffering of hunger and thirst, and of the animals, of their ignorance, and then being used like as slaves and so on. And then there is the jealous gods, the demigods, who always quarrel and fight. And then the gods who experience suffering of change and falling to lower realms. And so there is just no place anywhere where there is no suffering. So the suffering does not disappear anywhere in the 6 realms. So for example, to talk about the hell realms, where beings experience suffering of heat and cold and being burned and boiled, imagine what kind of feeling, what kind of suffering that is by being pierced by weapons, by sharp weapons. And for example, if you just are touched by a weapon, a sharp weapon, how does this feel? And in the hell realms, it is hundreds and thousands times worse than that. Or for example, imagine like 30 or so knives stab you at the same time. How would it feel? And then of course the suffering in the hell is far more intense than that. And then there is the hot hells, where where beings are boiled and burned. Now imagine we just pour some hot water over our hands, or somebody sets you on fire or so. What kind of feeling is that? And of course it is more intense in the hell. And the same is for the cold. Imagine you need to touch an extremely cold piece of iron, for example. It would just burst your hand into it would crack out, open your hand. It would be so cold. And so there's all these inconceivable sufferings in the hell realm. And then also in the hungry spirit realm, the hungry spirits experience suffering of hunger and thirst. And now let's imagine how it is how we feel when just for one day we don't get to eat and to drink. It is almost then unbearable. And for example, some of us have done the Nyungne retreat where we take these 2-day vows. How hard is that already? Or even if we couldn't eat for a whole week. And then the hungry spirits never get to eat anything for hundreds and thousands of years. And they always spend their entire time in blazing hunger, and there's nothing they can do about it because the karma is still not exhausted. And so for as long as the karma is present, they won't die from starving, and just continue to suffer in this way for hundreds and thousands of years. So the suffering is really incredible.
Tene ta tundrola yang tene tundru donga yores tundrola tene yin ju ko chus ta yin de wang wo chi de pa ya tundro ra yore tene de da tham che le tene ta yin ge ko chus ne pe ji chimbo chala ji chimbo kaya tene ja dong se ya tene ta tundru ge kang ma bu yong ge yore tundrola tundro kha che yang Dakpo yakpo tene sochong yakpo chiki yorode tuyong ko tundro changma na tene Dakpo yungjo de soke ta kochu si tene thama ma tundro de so gengo chande tene sen sha sake yore tene te mayin ba yang kochu mayin ba tundro yin ba tamje yang shai chi da pakpo chi da chag chi de da tamje ge tene simji mambo sochu go yore ba senga su musun tung go yore 배는 안서 따라 상지는 따라 샤스 상지는 징로지나 다 니마르라 배는 냥라고 지이나 같이 니마르를 쉬어요. 배디나이 천에 같이 니마르를 사요. 근데 때 많이 붙는로 속차다. 같이 지 쉬어요. 세게요. 또 대다 탐지 세 용어 갑라야 남상 마세 외치는 숨볼로 코란 메타 땅야. 숨볼로 코란 온로야. 놈는 온로요 봐. 대조 가서 무슨 맥긴 통고요라. 무슨 맥긴 통고요래. 도저기 깨자시 두고요 말이 마도. 도저는 소와 동안 찍바래. 나랑도 죽보데 무슨 매는 따서나 소와 동안 강유 바테 빼나 나랑도 냐직 메타 데이터 왔다나 동안 찍바 찍잖아. 제발 전에 요거요 말이. 대연아 코란도 깨자시 두고요 말이. 맞아. 대 코란도 동아요 봐 고요 말이 봐. 동아 요 담이 답지 시요 말이 하얀 고요 말이 인도도 진 사요 얘나요 답지 세나 근데 코란 솔라다 나랑 좀 메타 따와나 이게 동아 강요 바대야 심지 둔로대다 탐지라야 갑래 강대 봐 동아 강요 봐 직장 저거요래 대답다 나서 둔로라 동아 산지 마셔봐요래 코란도 찍리 둔로 찍리 산로야 그 동아요래 둔로 그 동아 산지 마셔봐 둔로래 생각도 시인 바라 와서 죽었다 동아 여래대 동아들 탓고요. 소소 레전드 넘버 민밖에 루트는지 랑용도 근데 대답지 동아 용고요래스.
So then there's the suffering of the animals who experience various forms of suffering. So, for example, some of them are forced to labor and to work like being enslaved, work like slaves for others, for people. For example, they have to carry really heavy loads, or they are bound together in shackles and so on, really constrained. And then, so these are animals that are owned by people. And of course, there's also other animals that are owned by people, like pet animals that do not experience so much suffering because we care for them well, but and many other animals which are owned are used for being used for their labor, and then also for their flesh. When they get old, then they're killed and they're eaten, and some of them are killed for their skins or their blood, their flesh. So we can see it everywhere around us. For example, there's certain restaurants where they serve meat, for example, fish. Then how many fish die there each and every day? how many other animals die there each and every day. And so then, how they die, what is the way in which they die? For example, many animals in certain restaurants, they are not first killed and then cooked, but some of them are even cooked when they're still alive, or they are fried when they're still alive, and then they die that way. So these animals have also feelings, they also feel pain, but it is just they can't tell us that, they can't talk, so we just ignore their pain. But if we imagine how it would feel for us to be burned or fried alive in such a way, how would it feel in our body? It feels quite the same way for the animal. It's just that they cannot tell us that, they can't talk to us. So because they can't talk, they can't give us a sign that we don't understand that they suffer, and we are not even much bothered by it. We don't really investigate how they experience that, and we just eat them like they are food. But if we really would investigate how they actually are feeling when they are being killed like that, then we would find that just like we would feel pain on our bodies, they feel a similar pain on their own bodies. And the pain is really incredible. And so then also, not only are they used by humans in this way, but also they hunt and eat each other, they hurt each other. And they cannot become free from their suffering, because for as long as that karma still exists, they will continue without any escape.
Tene pena ngana su ta tro to so tene da zong de to so to tene dakpo ke pe ko chu si tene ja nze ma ja ya ja ke thop ba ke dam ya
Serma.
nze ma chan ze to khal ja yo
Khala
khala tende je
pacho da wo.
pa jo ke tara khran che ting jo ja sa de tene pa jo ke sama de tu gon sama de mi bi chan do ga
Khane chere.
che ng jo ja ga ro
Che le.
ha
Ti ko che kya pile tene?
ten jo ja sa de tene tu gon sama de mi pa chan do ga tu gon sama de mi pa chan tene pa jo de khran sha kam po chan do ga tene che den ze ma ja ng jo ja mi zo ring ne de da tene khran sama ma te na sama khashela ko ken 저도 zupo de kam go ma de ta bo de Quran sol ta sha de pa zong ya ji de sim kin de gu gu de sama kha che go go sa de sama te ya mi sa de sim ji de sha de kam po ma cha bi ji de den ge ta bi dang go yo de ma ke de ta de da tham je yang chi so so ke kevin ge ji de den de dang go yo so so le kevin de wa gang ya mi ja rani zi mo se ya ji de sim kin ka se so je go pena ngana tara zabilin temo chi yungo do tara ti langgo lan da ja chi do te ga sam temo se ya ni do temo se ne ta phali te le ni da ja tende je ne te ka le
ma po te
nga le ma po te yo ne tende ka le sang ji ma cha ba chi yo re na te le ma ma bu chi temo ta tende chama ke te le chi ge mo ta temo sam ko yo dung bo sam chi ta wa yin na rani te ta ba ji yin ka le te yo wa yin na cho wa dong ka se yu sa re Rani tenda uchi kable donga tenda chowa kanyu pate lango tele te taban chowa donga yore. Yena yang ngachu haku yo man zemo ze satani chigi yores. Ta te taba ta sanji ma chabu donga tene tunole yores.
So then, for example, there's some animals that we use like for our own use, like cattle, for example, like cows. For apparently that when the cow moves its tongue, then it produces a lot of saliva, and that saliva causes the food to digest. So in this way, the cow digests the food as it moves the tongue and produces the saliva. And so then, of course, if it keeps digesting the food that way, you have to feed it a lot of food because it keeps digesting. And otherwise, if you don't feed it so much and it keeps digesting, so it would go very thin, and then you wouldn't have a lot of profit. So what some people do actually with the cows is they put a nail through the tongue. So they make them basically they kill the nerve in the tongue with this nail, so the cow cannot move the tongue anymore. So because the cow can't move the tongue, can't produce any saliva, so can't digest the food well. So then the profit is that they don't have to feed the cow much because it can't digest it anyways because it has no saliva to digest. So then they have the profit of a cow that doesn't go thin because it doesn't digest, and also that they don't have to spend anything on feeding the cow. And so thinking about how much meat they can sell from that cow, and they're just waiting for the cow to be ready for their profit. And so this is when we think about profit, but sometimes we don't even think about the profit. Sometimes the suffering of the animals, it becomes almost like entertainment for us, like a game. For example, there is those bull running, the bull runs when they wave the red cloth, and the bull runs towards the cloth. So it's for us, for human beings, it's like an entertainment. It's a show, and we laugh and we have fun, and it's like a game for us. But then, and we think about how the bull is experiencing that. And the bull has a different experience, has great, incredible suffering. And if we would be put through these kind of sufferings and pain, how would we personally feel then? And so in the same way that we would feel, the bull actually also feels. It is just that we don't pay attention to that. We don't know, we don't bother about how the bull would feel.
Tene ta lama yin la cha yana tene khorang la sayan thong ke kang ke yo marite yena yang hla la tene pam jo lom ju chen bo yo de tene khorang chado che yo chado che ne tene chado wang ta pa ma thu ja ge re hla ta pa shi ma thu ja ne tene ma thu ja de tene hla ke lama yin ma sen lo yo re ko sen lo yo re yena yang ko ma thu de jun che ge yo ma ko chado de jun ma che de ma thu de jun ma che be chen tene tendre ke ngana tene lo ja tha tong tha mang bo ma thu ja ne tene ko che te khorang che ka che de na ti ring na tene ma thu tendre ja ne tene ta dong han man tha mi pe na tendre je ne yo re lama yin la tene hla ndo ji cha yana ta nga zo rik tu ge na ne ne kap ke hla de chi che shi re ne kap hla de chi che shi tene hla de lo tong tha mang bo tu bia ta tendre ke hla yong ko yo re den du tene hla khorang la dong ha la ko thar yo re se dong ha la thar yo ma ko hla la pho tong ge dong ha s hla khorang ge ta ra lo ta tha tong tha mang bo lo khorang ji bo je ne den do yo re nam shi ta khorang ge ma she le hon zam la ta lo jap tha re ni le hon la tene khorang che yin ba ha ko yong ko chite se char yong re chite shan de ta mun ju su nam ge su nam le te ta tham ji zo ta ko ge mge we le te ta khorang cha cha ka le yo re mge we le cha cha ka le yo de ta khorang mge we le te ji sin dang ne tene khorang cha yin ba ha ko che cha de tene khorang ka wa ji he yo mi nya wa le ji he yo mi ta ye da le ji he yo mi tun do le ji he yo mi te ko ha ko yo re ha ko jang ko le phin tho yo ma ko le jo yo ma ta te le thar thab yo ma tene te ta ba ta ko dong ha te ta lo ja tha kha khel ta nyong go yo res ten hla la photong go dong ha.
So then there is the suffering of the demigods or the jealous gods, and they do they don't suffer from not finding any food or drink. So they live in an abundance actually, but then they also see that the gods have even more abundance, and they are jealous at the gods, and so they with their jealousy they always constantly fight the gods. But then the gods are more powerful than they are, and the gods always kill them. But that doesn't stop them because they are very jealous. So for however long they live, for hundreds and thousands of years, they spend their life in fighting and quarreling endlessly. So there is also endless suffering for the jealous gods. And then there is the gods themselves, and of the 6 realms, the gods temporarily experience still the greatest happiness. They spend a long life for thousands of years in great happiness, but still they are not free from suffering. They experience the suffering of change and falling to the lower realms when their life comes to an end. So first they spend life for thousands of years in the greatest happiness, but then one day it will come to an end and they will die. And before they die, some hundreds of years in our times before they die, they know that they will die, so certain signs of death become apparent. And that is when their virtues and meritorious karmas are coming to an end. But then they still have this propensity of non-virtue in their mind, and they will have to follow karma. So they know that they will die, and they also know exactly where they will be reborn, either in the hells or hungry spirit realm or animal realm and so on. And even though they know that, there's nothing they can do about it. They have no way to escape from that. They see it clearly, but there is no way out. There's nothing they can do. And so for those last hundreds of years in our times, the gods experience tremendous terror by knowing where they will go next. So then there is the suffering of the humans, and we all know how much human beings suffer. And essentially, whatever is our suffering, since we are human, we all do experience the suffering of the four major types of suffering, and all experience that. And that is the suffering of birth, and then aging, and then sickness, and then death. And nobody can escape from that.
dawa gola degi yorwa dawa gola de kap de dunga sanji ma chapa yore so dunga sanji ma chapa yore pe te kawat lang yore sena ngarang so sanju tsokpa na lo la ma chu ya pa na yi jengi yu pa ta tendre ke tsokpa na chu ya pa na yin ke te dunga yore so ma kho ta na de no kap la de ta men chonga chowa yore so yore
So no matter how we spend our life, even if we have a lot of wealth and power and so on, one day anyways we will go old and we will also die, and there's just nothing we can do about it. There's no way to escape from that. So we all are bound by this kind of suffering. And then for the suffering of birth, this is something we don't know so clearly, we don't really remember it, but in the sutras it is explained that for the time that we spend in the wombs of our mothers for 9 months, about 9 months, there is also already inconceivable suffering. And in the sutras it says the feeling of that kind of suffering is just like you're stuck in like a pool of filth. Like somebody would stick you into a toilet or so, like disgusting, a filthy feeling. It is said in the sutras that this is how we suffer in the womb. So then, of course, the suffering of sickness is incredible.
Kakhe mingi pitu ya natsa yore, kakhe la mingi tu matapa ya natsa yore, ta kakhe la zubo ke ta detang mi pa, ta tendrik natsa la natsa ring manda mambo yore, dor dina zubo dala ta natsa che yone zonde, tani ko dunga che rang yi cha sare yisi.
So there is different forms of illness. Sometimes there's illness we can cure, sometimes it's incurable illness, sometimes we just have we are not well in our body, we don't feel good in our body. There's all different forms of physical ailments, and all of these are incredible suffering, we know that.
Tene ta gepa dongane ta sanji machapayu sunguyores sanji machapayu sunguyore ta ma gengo chayong kabla tene ngarang ge zupo lo chungchong ge tene zupo ke nipa de mi pacha tene kangba ta lapa wangbo tamjele nipa mi pacha nawo wangbo ta mege wangbo laso bala ya nipa mi pacha ta tene mege khida ma thongwache nawa ge khida ma wache 다 든득 강이 망보 이열에 든득 강이 망보라 띵데 띵데 머임바긴 통총시 아 드네 깨자 저바트는 레인마테 베체 드네 깨자 야보 셰로 지게요 말에 다 강게라 통총지게 여러와 되는데 드네 강게라 다 그런 속이마도 하마오와게다 드네 동아여레스 맞죠 무스 강게 잡아이나 드네 가서 뒤 동아한테 하고 여레마도 맞죠 강게 맞아서도 맞죠 강게게 동아한테 시투고요 말레스 tende gangela donga sanji machabe yore tende chi ngaranso che soso ki nama pama punji tende gange yuna tende to sola samjong sigo ya tende hajang ki chimbo chabe yore.
And so then the suffering of aging, of getting old. So when we get old, then we lose the strength and the radiance that we had in our young bodies. It all declines. Our legs and our hands movements decline, and also our sense powers decline. For example, we can't see with our eyes so well, and we don't hear very well with our ears. So there are many problems that come up when we get old. And then also, younger people, they look down on the older people and they make fun of them, or like, they don't respect them. The older people ask them something, they just don't answer, or nobody wants to actually spend time with them and talk nicely to them. So these are all sufferings that only they really know how it is. We, as when we are still young, we don't actually know how they feel, and we will only really be able to understand it when we ourselves are getting older. So the suffering of aging, of old age also is really incredible. And so because of that, when we think about that, it is really extremely important that we are careful to be very kind, very gentle. If we have anybody elderly, for example, in our family, or our parents or other relatives, or whoever is around us, it is important that we really treat them with a lot of consideration and kindness.
다 배는 개부 동안으로지 충충으로지 나랑게 시수로지 해봐야나 다 나랑게 내당으로지 something이지 해봐야나 이마야나 나랑 딱 주보 탕보 열어와 다다야 주보 마탕만 도 이내야 부호 열어 부호도 다지 깬자도 전에 마음 밥이 온 갑라 띵띵 뜻 강이 요거도 드니 니마야나 코 강이 든잖아요. 요만 코페 주보 양차 되는 로고요. 다라 야마 깬자도 좀 로디 지 락파 띵사요나 고사리 삼삼 초와제 요도. 드니 가지 띵사미나 잡잡지는 로고야. 조본 로 마라. 든르게 강이 빼망본도스. 뺨총로지 휴바이나 가장아디 아부국은 소용된가 남르지오 자고로 남르지오 자야를 주두직 투여를 관이 바로라. 주두직 투 바로인데 되니 가서 남르 푸니 프리안서 랑가라 대진데 까마슴쯤에서 라마죠. 까마슴쯤에서 말하는데 딱 까마슴쯤 나노리 남르지오 자 투거다. 남르네 마음 밥투야. 남르는 양주 투고 서데 되니 다 남르 뇽데 되니 나게 남르데 랑가 파제데 다 죽본 로거와 졸라 라페티는 죽본 로인데 되니 코라 니바코라면도 그 주보 힘바 갑레면도 뿌모 되게 쇼고면도 되니 다 대초양 빼나 게용 와게다 게용 다 소리도스.
So there's just talking from my own experience of how I experience it, also the sufferings that come along when we grow old. Also, when I think back in the past when I was younger, I had a really strong body, And now it's still okay, it's not so bad, but I already notice change. So, for example, I have some problems with my knees. So now just walking the steps down and up already creates some difficulty, which I didn't have before. In the past, I would just run those steps with very light legs. But now, when I approach the steps, I have these thoughts of, I hope there's a rail I can hold on my hand. And if there's no rail, then I think I have to be very careful and just walk really slowly. And I can't walk so quickly anymore. So you notice a change. Things are declining. For example, just the other day, when I arrived here, when I flew from Albuquerque to Seattle, then somewhere in between I had to change planes. And according to the schedule, there was just 1 hour in between. But then the flight from Albuquerque was late, so then I only had 30 minutes to change the plane. So in 30 minutes I have to get off the plane and go to the next gate and board the next plane, so not a lot of time. So I had to go very quickly, and I also had some bags in my hand. And at that time I really noticed that I really don't have enough strength. So I noticed really some pain in the knees. So that is a sign that I'm aging. That's a sign of aging.
Then nga lo chungjo ka gumpa la den do ka la nga zo gumpa ka lang na lo la tara rambe de shing de ye shing rambe de ye lang na lo la
Shing rambe
ramde de ye ramde de indi tene cha chembo to tene ramde tene on dik to ke jaro dik ke jaro nga lo chungjo de ying chao shuin do sang do ying chao nga ran thong ye ying chao thong de nga ran de ji ko san zan yong ko men do they get ja to mando
Achana
they get the courage in ja to mando sina nga ge de lo chung de chek de kom parcha yo ba parcha yo de ko ke ja ko mando zan parcha yo ba
Parcha kare
pe za de dewo yo ba
아니 계란
chek de chek de dewo yo ba
그냥 지고 양보다로
지고 빼 양보 로 봐 지고 양보 ren sa de ta ji chim bo ji bo ke ja he ma chek de ya bo yo ba de ko ran yin ke pe ke ja ko mando ko 양보 진 ordo yin ke ja yan be zor chen ja tu ko mando 가르생 안 잉차오 고여와 잉차오 뭐 임바든지 야 잉차오 통고여래 딩 하나 들지 이거 삼대 대 영어 두고 뭐도 다다 나한테 고고면도 대 영어도 가르치 영어도 쓰는 다고 뒤짜 책도 다고 니바테 뭐도와 디 뎀차게 니바테 뭐도 대 메서들이 코 랑잉 영어래 배나 다나 효가 나 토가니 마 샤블론도 임베 샤블론도 뭐 참만 니디요 봐 nga me yimbala de disturb jindu yo marwa tringa ma kale yonde yina ko ke hyokchim bo jago ko zubo de yo marwa ta de yabo yo marwa de so ke ja de nga kale ende chi zubo de ko ma ti ni dole ma to juni namjun do chindo to ko ma do ke hyokchim bo ja yo de ta de tamchi yang ko ma ge yo ga ta de ke de ni kangi ta tri ha ko do
For example, when I was a boy and a young monk in a monastery, we had these floors similar to this, like wooden floors. And at that time, the big monks, when they would walk over the floor, they would make a lot of noise. So apparently, I found this very appealing, really impressive, like big man, So I also wanted to be like them, like a big man, like a big monk, and that I tried to walk like them, and try to make the noise that they produce. It seemed so natural for them, and even if I tried hard, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't produce this kind of heavy noise, because I was a boy and my joints were very flexible. And they were just too soft to produce any of these sounds. So even if I tried, because I found it quite impressive, and now I don't actually find it impressive anymore, and I'm actually don't want to walk like that. But now I have no choice; I have to walk like that. And now I'm finding out that it's not so impressive. It's because the joints are losing their strength, their flexibility. And now, when there's no flexibility, you kind of go in a clunky way and then produce this sound. So for example, just this morning, the place I'm staying, there is staying upstairs and I'm trying to go downstairs quite early, but of course I don't want to wake somebody up with going really clunky. And I'm trying to not to disturb anybody, and I really find that it took the greatest effort to be really careful and go really slowly, because otherwise there was no way to prevent making these noises. I was trying to go really slowly, but there's nothing I can do because the joints just don't have this flexibility anymore. So it's a sign of aging.
That thing I also want to know. That Koran, Sika kita chung jero wanga te samji ha ko yore. Tene da gangi cha yona tele dugu yore te lo chiwa cha yana. Tene ngana so te jupa ting go ya. O tene ngana so shache ti go ya. Ta tende ke kangi mangpo yong go yore. Ta meng do chi cha yona ta ma mangpo drib yong kabla tene make ke nipa nyam. Tene make ma thong wa cha. Ta penna ngana ki namju pichu ta ya ke chala ya ngana ke make ha ma wa cha. Rosa langa ya ngu ma zen wa cha. Tendeke kangi mangpo yore. Da nawa na chola ta ngana so chi yang ko maraba omba chaya. Ta tso ke kangi mangpo yongge yore. Kangi mangpo sanji ma chapta so ngasu ta mikta na chola ngana so chu mi ja ngana so tso samno tangwa yana ha ko tbe yore. Tso kangi chimbo yore gangi ta so donga ta geba donga si ja chimbo ya sungu yore. Sungwa na yi ngusu tso donga sanji ma chapta yode ba tende yongge yore se geba donga. Then, tan chubu dongani, ta she magowari, tsama, simchi yudojo, tan jinang jisa cheade da kon cheade le tsama shego yoreda. Basin sukcha chin charo, ngaran su mayin charo, tsama tan jiyate kawalin jigo yosne, cheade le jigo yore. Then the thing ngaran su mayilu, lang le zonte, cheayin ba ta chu sa, then the thing that jega nachiko donga, se, ta donga chimbo yena na, nede yore. Te mai bata ngaran so chi dongan thinse ki sanji ma chapa yore penna ngaran so chungba ro chi na chungba khorang ke chong la man ro wa o ta chi ngaran so si dong ba yin na yang si dong ba ke chi le ka le ma to ba si dong ni ma sa ro ya ke donga yore ta lob jong sin ro chi na lob jong ya bu chi ma ro ba ta donga yore chu ta ma chu so phar pa yin na phar pa khorang la ta ya khorang la pa su ke donga yore ta to so donga to sam no ta wa yin na tini samji ma chapa yore te ngaran so ta 먹을 쫓아 인연 차도 되는 거랑 저 먹게 동하다 저 하고요. 저 하고아이나 제가랑 저 녀르 동하시 봐. 여다게 동하시 봐. 다도 좀 거랑 저 지금 만통바지 현도 그 여러 와. 만통바지 시게요래. 당하랑 저 저 지금 거랑 저 샘되는 초발레가 갑래 커보요래. 다랑 무슨 거랑 저 먹을 쫓아는 되는데 먹게 돼도 동하 참 통고요래. 통데 다저 지금 하고요만이나 근데 당 코바게 동하지란 yin 봐. 마소게 롭자지 히트비야 근데 연구요래 답변나 뭐 동하라양 코랑 당하나도 직 답지 세용와이나 뭐 코랑라야 로아르도 동하 찹상데 요대반로지 요래 가서 다든데 답지시 심주 세용와이나 동하지 요대반로지 요래 변나 멀라지 녀베 동하스나 간디지 요래세나 당하나도 제 다다른 가자 롱바도 좀 만족 침보 다용바게다 든지기 롱바도 솔라 peñero dongana yi ngusum chi yoro wa koran sola donga sanji ma chapa yore ta manthok jas longba chi la lebyon wa yena ta ngana chi mam khema jam na khandi yosari menda khema chi phang na khandi yosari ta kadu se no kadin choyo samba ta drikin jing nang na de de ko nyewa ngus no nyong de yore ta koran so zupo tena chi tini yada ge donga hiende yada ge donga kari chi kong ge donga yore wa saya tan thongya min jo ge donga 다 대답은 안 하서 따라 롱박하게 밤조 쪼요 대바 대답 담지더니 뭐에 기념을 같이 쉬어요래 제 사야미 대바 통야미 대바 더 좀가서 무스더라 통투부도와 롱박하게 했더니 강에 요 대바 대인데 먹랑 여다가 동안 차창 같은 통투부요 근데 든도 답 동안 안 소리 요래 말라 빼는 안 소치 욕보 그 내가 지겨워 욕보 그 내가 지내더니 진다야 보면 했더니 욕보겠다 빵골라더니 요보도 저 인다겠더니 독보시비 땅그 독보시비 땅더니 사마마테베치 레카 망보그 냥친진더니 레카 망보그 대답다 던조나 이게더니 코코주시네더니 던저기 동안 망보 가나서 무슨 통투베도 저 열에스 더니 다 라마인지 동안 라마인 동안도 좀 차도된 인생을 중고 요래 다 대답은 안 소리 요래 빼는 안에서 충바 쳔보도서 잭질은 차도던 진심지 다시 돈받아서 잭질은 차도던 진심지 다 대답이야 지 럽정스니나 럽정스 코랑솔이야 잭질은 진심단 차도시 땅 안에서 지 죽보다 죽제야 보유대봐 다 던지지 깨다 유대봐 다 코랑솔 잭질은 차도시네 우유 그때는 코랑솔 따라 약보 요리네 땅 약보 요리때 얘는 양 안에서 된 차도도 요용 봐 텔레티인데 되니 뭐 얘는 약보 요 봐 텔레티니 안에서 차도 찌네 되니 안랑라 내 땅 약보 유자 안랑 샘된 차도 그 측대요다 측네 동안 문탐이 받듯이 요래스 되니 양 안에서 뭐 카실라지 다 쳔들 되니 롬중 아탕 hla나 요래코 레틴들 빼 죽보 대탕 유대봐 밤줄 땀 롬중 푸슴 소바 유대봐 든지 요래 hla나 이게 대와 요래 얘는 딱 남긴 쳐용 요로 단초 용인데 따라 쳔들은 거는 신차 쳔보요래 대치 쳔보요인데 신차 쳔보요래 때 신차들 다 카타는 거는 로고 유바 나는 거 하고 용고요래 근데 갑들이 동화 산지 뭐 잡아 용고요래 근데 나는 좀 뭐네 다 찍어난 전에 나는 좀 창말아 요대 바인데 그 말로 동화 간이 때문에 산노 나와이나 양 근데 말로 동화 망보요래 다 지쳐져고라 다 동화 제 나사게 동화 밤줄고 동화 다치 인제더니 제 누셈당 차도 그 왕게더니 나나 강인자 뭐라 망보 동아나는 추대요래다 너들은 멋지 보겠더니 삼노 땅와이나 로아르도 동아 찹상지 하고 어떻게 찍당 되니 로아르도 그 동아지란 이인바 동아게 풍보인바 되니 같이 하고 어떻게 요래서 말아레베 가르송 요래서나 되니 코한테 매우 없다 그래서 코한테 매우 없다 되니 매업 디나나 내데 심기 탐지 메킹 우스 책도 요바나이 대답이리서 대대는 말아래 박 대답은 코와된 통네 되는 코와들 로도 투부여레스 대답은 통 되니 디나기 당 안한서 따라 로 추선로 추람든로 생디 당 코와 끼와 스마가 라다 매 데블럼 주데라 메기 없다 동하지란 이봐 되는 것 대하 고용와이나 되니 델 타로 탑 다 탐진치 부 공방들 되니 가이 맞을 런주고 요레스
So this is just a small decline of the joints that beginning to decline, and even only when there is a slight decline we can already understand the suffering. But then when we really get old, it gets worse and worse, and then it turns into even greater suffering. And we can't walk at all anymore. For example, we have to use a walking stick or a cane, and we have to even go in a wheelchair and so on. We lose all our strength, or we lose our eyesight. We see less and less. Even we go blind, and then our eyesight is so poor. Even the things that we used to use before, that we are familiar with, we don't recognize them anymore. We don't hear well with our ears, we might become deaf. So when we think about just these declines of the ears and the eye and so on, we can somehow understand how difficult that must be. And that is the difficulty that we experience when we age. The suffering of aging becomes increasingly worse. And that is something that we can directly observe. It is very clear to us. And then there is the suffering of dying. And that is, no need to mention, our greatest fear, our greatest suffering. Not just our greatest fear, but this is what all sentient beings, all beings want to escape from. The greatest fear, the greatest suffering is the fear of death. Whether one is a human being or an animal, an insect, anyone is mostly afraid to die. And so then as a human being, having obtained this body, we are certain to die. And while we are alive, we are in the midst of a lot of suffering, such as those 4 types of suffering, of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And even the slightest suffering, it always arises. So we can see in this world, when we look around, for example, there's some businessmen who want to be successful, but then they're not successful. It doesn't work out the way they want. Or there is some politicians who want to be successful and accomplish good things, but then they just fall down and they can't accomplish anything. or a student going to school having great ambitions, but then it doesn't work out so well. And just a normal, ordinary person, they all have their own problems and their suffering. Everyone has that. So when we just look at the people, we can really understand the nature of suffering, because we can see people. So when we talk about now the suffering of the hell, hungry spirits and so on, and we think that we are talking about a suffering that we can't actually see or directly witness. And when we bring it to mind, we can somehow try to understand, but we can't really see it. But when we actually really observe the human world, the people, we can actually understand all of the different forms of suffering in the 6 realms in samsara. When we can find all of that suffering in the human world also. So all of the suffering that exists, we can find it directly. We can witness it in the human existence too. For example, there are certain human beings who experience hell-like suffering. It is really a hell-like experience. For example, if you're born in a war zone where there's a lot of fighting and the bombs are dropping and people run around with guns. So your whole life you are afraid of death and you just wonder, when will they kill me? When will I die? So you live in the face of death on a day-to-day basis. And so that is really a hell-like experience, for example. And then we also can obviously witness the suffering of the hungry spirits, because what is a hungry spirit? They experience the suffering of not finding food and drink. And there is lots of human beings who do not find food and drink, and they live in starvation. There are some countries in the world where people die each and every day. How many people die of starvation each and every day in this world? And these are actual experiences of human beings that we can witness. So also the suffering of the hungry spirits is something that we can directly see and understand. And then also the humans experience the suffering of animals. For example, they are used as slaves, just like animals. And if their owner is not good, they will abuse them, will treat them badly, will not feed them enough food, and will make them work day and night as a slave. And that is a similar suffering to what we often do to animals. So we can also see that suffering in the form of humans. And then we can also see the suffering of the jealous gods, the demigods in the human realm, because the nature of that existence is one of jealousy and competitiveness. And we also have that, for example, between businessmen. They are jealous and competitive with each other. Or politicians are competitive and jealous with each other, or students in school, and so on. And even those who are very wealthy and even famous, then still, even though they have everything, they're still jealous at each other and competitive. So because there's jealousy in the mind, even if we are well off, if we see somebody else who is well off, then we are still jealous at them and we become competitive. So it is the competitiveness and jealousy that continues relentlessly to blaze within ourselves. And so it creates endless suffering. And then there's also the suffering of gods that we experience as human beings. So there's some who really live like gods in this life. They really have everything in order. So they have a good and healthy body, and they have enough wealth and food and might and power. Anything you can wish for, there are some people who have it. But still, actually, the more happiness and well-being we have, the more likely we are also to be attached to that. And then one day, however, when we die, we will have to separate from it. We must go on alone, and we must leave it all behind. And because it was very, very blissful and very happy, we don't want to let go of it. So then the letting go creates a lot of suffering. So these are how the 6 realms of samsara can be found in the human existence. And then the particular suffering of the humans is something that we also all experience, of birth, old age, sickness, and death. So there's lots of different types of problems and suffering that we experience as humans. So we we experience, we get sick, or we do not have enough wealth, or other people are jealous at us, or are harming us and create much difficulty. So we are really always in the midst of all kinds of problems and difficulties. So we really can understand the suffering of the 6 realms when we look at humans. We can see all that suffering represented in the human realm too. And so actually, no matter where we go in the 6 realms of samsara, it all has the nature of suffering. It is like a big heap, or the colony of great suffering, you can say. And Milarepa had said samsara is like a fire pit, and all the sentient beings within it are burned in this fire pit. And so Milarepa says, when I see this fire pit of samsara, then I can really turn away my mind. I can clearly turn away my mind from samsara. So then we have turned our mind towards the Dharma, and the Dharma has become the path. When the Dharma becomes the path, then we are also not aspiring any higher happy existences like gods and humans and so on. But we understand that even that existence of gods and humans is like a fire pit. All of samsara has the nature of suffering. And so when we understand that, then we will try to find a method to become liberated from samsara altogether, and try to find a way to attain complete enlightenment.
산지 좀 된데게 되니 공기 중보 중가오 세치여.
So?
중가오 산지기.
중가오.
봉지 중가오 세. 또 되게 로지지여래. 디 로지 텍스트만 쉬나. 되게 가르친 게 요래세나. 되니 가랑 수치 첸덕에 로데 간지 도고요 봐. 첸덕에 되니 로든 코란들이 신차게 로데 도장 드니 제와 스마게 로데 마도이나 양이 송내라 간지진도요 봐 된데 드니 첸드 돌아야 로도고레데 치스마 제 라다 매 토리레 지야게 로야 도고요레스 데 마도나 드니 코알 남실라 수남세디마 니 송네 롱고요레 된데 대따고 그랬더니 뺀충으로 지요레스 쫑가오 히바데 산지 좀 된데게 쫑보레
가르레
bunchi chonga
bunchi chonga
teni khoranso se chang se porin sa de ko jasere wa jasere sa tomjo ngathang chimbo yore tomjo ngathang chimbo yonde tani khorang la kimi yore kimi den sin la pundaraka se yore khorang kimi de la pundaraka teni sanje ma chapan jiktin khang jima ang tambo chag yore mona tendig jima chimbo yore khorang kimi de la teni khorang ji ji la hincha hale hincha chimbo yore da tene 산지에게 다 코랑 중보데 되니 코와데 동하래 타르트부어다 코와데 동하래 타르트부어인데 되니 남실에 되니 산지 코랑 고난 레비어
고난라
고난 레네 되니 코온데치 고동요 고동데 동데 서데데 산지리달 하고 되니 다 코랑기 띠미 뿐다르가 독바요래다 산지에게 탑시지네 뭐랑게 좋아되다 자하종도 그래 이상야 똑바요. 되니 다 산지 고난을 램디 다 nga라 사마치제로 지스. 된지인데 되니 다 종가오게 되니 사마트야 답릭지고라 답릭지인데 되니 코랑기 찜이 되게 제요 말이랍 거다. 때 코랑게 주트부에 막 고테고로 때 되니 뭐랑
어떻게
좋아게. 때고로 봐. 때 뭐랑게 마테야 쪼데 딱 코랑 자하종도 그래서 되게 딱 간도 톡지요 마사지니 드니 따치는 사마테는 디그레스 이나야 모랑게 엔데체는 죽을 치마 끼로 죽을 치마 끼네 대 코랑게 토바땡나 로 또네
소
코랑게 지미데
소 상점난데
말이 대 모랑게 좋아라
코랑 치마데
말이 모랑게 치마나 끈 저게
모랑 치마데나 세르
모랑 치마데 코랑게 토바라 끈으라 다 치랑 치마데 마간 몰라 못알아야 랩투고
마간
모랑 담자 요거레스 들라브
모랑글라레
모랑게 코랑 들라브 모랑 좋아라 근데 코랑게 답자데 켈랑리 chimati makan hula ya chiranzal kolle tili chigins tene chendu tene khorang ke sama khone masalo la sundi sanje phan ro go sanje phan ro go tene khorang jubo sone sanje ji tu mari ko ta de no sanje kale ro go da yena sanje ji chini tu go mari da sanje juk sing tu go mari ta ko sama khode yo ra sanje te ya ko sanje jab lan ro go tene tu te se ring bong gon ro go wa tu ring bong gon tene lamga hila tene sanje gugur tene khorang ni thok tende se tene tana mara tara Jimmy Lunga Be Gengo Hajang and Dongi ba Tendage Yore Tendage on the Tene Gamochi make me jo Dongi but Tendage on the Tene make me jo Sharwala Tene Koranga Sanjela ya Hilapu Tenage Tene Sanjay Trawati Shirangi Jimmy Tetan the game of the Sun Zima check those Sun number check those Trawati Tawatindi Tene Da Jonga Teta Pindi Akora Yomaris Beja Chayan Roya Yomari Kok Jimmy and Zimachigaris, the Sanjila Lane, Tendria Tepari. Tendria Lane and do Tene Sanjig tell mixer Kanya Song Yomalin Masomache. The nature Flyer and Rondu US, Flyer and Rondu US, Flyer Temot and the US, Sanjig Tawachi Tipari Korala. Jonga. Oh, ngan rondo use, flyer la temo tando use, and that length in the Japanese.
There's a story about the time of the Buddha who had a relative called Chongao. And so this story is to show us why we need to turn away our mind from samsara and how we turn our mind away from samsara, and that when we cultivate this sense of renunciation, that also we need to turn away from even our aspirations for higher birth in future lifetimes like gods and humans and so on. Because if we do not turn away from samsara altogether, then once the good karma comes to an end, again we will fall into the three lower realms. So there's a story of the time of the Buddha that should illustrate that. So there was this time where the relative Chongao, he was a very good life, was very powerful and wealthy. Yeah. Like a royal family. So since he was, the Buddha was royal, so since he was a relative, he was also royal and very powerful. And he was a younger relative of the Buddha. And so he also had a wife. He was a householder and he had a wife, Bundaraka. Her name was Bundaraka. And she was extremely beautiful. She was the most beautiful woman you can in the whole world. There's nobody more beautiful, and they were deeply in love with each other and very attached to each other. And so the Buddha knew about that, and he wanted to find a way to liberate him from the suffering of samsara. And so one day the Buddha came to his house door, knocked on the door, and so the wife knew it was the Buddha, and so she was very suspicious. What is the Buddha doing here? And she thought that maybe he's trying to take my husband away and making him a monk. So the Buddha was just asking for food, begging for food. And so then her husband, of course, said, we need to offer some food to the Buddha. And the wife refused to offer any food to the Buddha because she was worried that if we offer to the Buddha, then eventually he will skillfully make her husband a monk. So then her husband still insisted to offer food to the Buddha. And in the meantime, the Buddha already left the house and went back. And so since he insisted so much to offer the food to the Buddha, she took some of her saliva and smeared it on his crown, his forehead. And she said that you can offer the food to the Buddha, but you must return before this saliva has dried. You must vow. And so he promised that he will return once the saliva had dried. And so he left the house, and the Buddha had already gone. And even though the Buddha was walking slowly and he was walking very fast, it was hard to catch up with the Buddha. So the Buddha was then actually eventually stopping and waiting for a long time for him to finally reach there. And so when he got there, they met, and he offered the food to the Buddha. And then there was an old woman, an extremely ugly woman, a blind woman too, and crippled. And so the Buddha asked him, so who do you think is more beautiful? Is it this old lady, or is it your wife? And he replied, there's just simply no comparison. How can you compare that? Obviously, my wife is much more beautiful. My wife is the most beautiful. So the Buddha didn't respond anything to that, but the Buddha said, so how would you like it if I take you to the god realm? Do you like to look around in the god realm? And he thought that would be entertaining, and so he said, I'm sure I would like to look around in the god realm.
Tene tendrejene tene sanje ke zimcho ke tene korang hlayo len ro to yores. Tene sanje ke korang hlayo la chin de tene ta hlayo la tene ta na du pa tene zito de din ba yores. Tene tina na ta bola tene pomo mambo ko de pa ta tene ke pomo thamji ke ta kuigyap tan chupa romo damni la so ba tendrejene ta bachi la pomo mambo ko de pa tene mangbo yore. Tene ya sacha chik la pomo mambo ki gog de yore. Gog ne ta tendrije tabrik se ne ta khurang so gog de yore. Tendrije gog de tene ta khurang ke tende thong yore. Tende thong de tene tendrije thong tendrije de tene tendrije thong de tene sanje ke chwati pare. Chwati de ta pomon de so namba chen de ta chinang ke chimi de namba chen de se chwati de. Chwati de tene chongga ke ta ha game shawa ma te ta ngaki chimi ni nawo chando si ngaki chimi de game on ro chasndo daso pe rinda ta yari daso namba che dos khorang ka sanje lin tene jabaris tene ta tinde chen tene kora jam de ta pomo daso go de tene khorang ka tawa ti pare pomo chiran so go de yos khorang ka tawa ti inde tene pomo daso ngaki tara jiktinje khamne tene sanje ke chungbo sanje ke punchi chonga chonggawa hibachi yeres tene khorang rabde songne chutum ke domba de songne tene khorang hlayo le jeyong gore tene dedu tene ngaso ke ngaso choga chage yore de ngaso khogugde yo labare tene khorang soge ta te chonggawa yimi ke ja khang ye yo ma ta tene ji gugde yo tene chonggawa khorang yin ba ha gore
Dine chunggawa law so konso
chonggawa law yo ko ke
Dine chunggawa yin ba ha gore
거기 강연 띵거만 남주 다 빼나 쫑가고 그냥 쓰고요 라로와
Dine krat ang chunggawa go
나츠 쫑가고 그대요 라레
Ande ko ha ko ro
때 코코가 하고 코랑이 바 하고 코랑이 바 하고 됐더니 다 코랑 다다랑 코랑 수치 초가잖아 간디지 뭐 싸면다 코랑 좋았더니 제요로와 좋았더니 제 얘나 코더니 제 투고요 말에 때 됐더니 다 코랑 그 산질이 쉬네 땅아 랍 송이 다 코랑 다 하지 야던데 계랑리스
So then the Buddha brought him to the god realm miraculously. And then when they were in the god realm, there were many beautiful goddesses. So for example, they came across a young man who was surrounded by many beautiful goddesses who were around him, making offerings to him and playing instruments and so on. And so then they came to a different place, and there were only goddesses, and they were making all sorts of preparations and seeming to wait for someone. So then the Buddha asked Jonggawa again, so now who is more beautiful? Is it those goddesses, or is it your wife? And then he said, there's no comparison. Compared to them, my wife is more like this old lady. But these are much more beautiful, of course. They are incredibly beautiful. And so then he came to this lonely goddesses, and he asked them, so what are you doing alone? Who are you waiting for? And they said that they're in the world there is a younger brother of the Buddha and called Jonggawa, and he will eventually become a monk, and he will keep his vows perfectly. And as a result of that, of this merit, he will be born in the God realm. So we are awaiting him here. So he knew that, of course, this was him. They were talking about him. And he, of course, wanted to stay with them right away, but he couldn't stay at this time. So he went to the Buddha and said, I'm ready to become a monk. So now he decided to become a monk.
다 코랑기 끼미데 요 근데 코랑 다와 제바레스 다와 제네다 다와 동바 손에 대요레 다와 동바 손 대인데 근데 다 산지에게 잡라센다 쫑가고 꼬혼데 넘버마다 바레스 쫑가고 꼬혼 넘버마다 바 코랑 라이얼레 제야게 치데다 아 대인데 디치데 코츠 좀 송고요레 대인데 치랑서 스직레 쫑가고 던 레바 마지스 다 창마게 쫑가고 단 통총 지거리라고다 공홍이 바로와 대인데더니 레바마지 라암데더니 다 든드지 산지가 송온데더니 쫑가고 코랑 딱 곰파 자화 나는 되게요데 자화 시지게 콜게자 셰로 지게요 말 자화게 야 주니 지게요 말 콜라 다 창매 코톤 안데 지게요다 코랑은 마 통총지 든드지 용거 근데 콜 동하 산지 맞아봤다 콜 용거요 다 든지 콜 동하 용네 데데 바깝라 드니 남이게래 양 산지게 저바지 지나 녀와는 런두유에 녀와라 때모 단두유에 라바리 레레 nga 녀와라 때모 단두유 라바리 녀와 단두유 람데 다 타네 산지게 양 점초게 코란 녀와는 만티서 녀와는 만티 인디드니 다 녀베 심지 때다 탐지드니 좁색 다 쪼힌 식바 깨긴 떠봤던 그 동안 산지 맞춰봐 또 조금 통요래다 코 진능 산지 맞춰본 진능 된지 다 듣는 돈 된지 된데 야 냐블 랭킹 카케게 양 곡되요래다 곡네 다빼 잡릭 제네다 다 듣는게 냐블 심지 용나 남사 되는 쪼초초 시 곡되더니 쫑가 코랑 양 잡아줘 치안 쓱곡되요 라바리 나 쪼게 따라 직된지 감라 쫑가오시 산지게 되니 중보 쫑가오시 바지여래 되니 다하코 라이얼레 지야게 지되더니 코랑 추첨게 따라 동바데 송되요래 되네 코랑 초용을 qabla 되네 추첨 동바데 또 코랑 라이얼레 지게요레스 되네 라이얼레 지네 되네 라이 보모냠데 되네 코랑게 대와 롱스주네 남지를 코랑 라이스 우남 존에 되네 냐와나네 제용거래 되네 대두 되네 가서 코 디나나 쪼기스 코랑 되네 라바레 되네 람데 되네 콘징낭 산지 마차바다 징낭 제요레스 징낭 제 되네 다다 코징아 하코스는 가르치거래 사미야게 되네 콘소와 흉자제네 되네 야코랑 양직 띵지 칸을래네 되네 코랑 라이얼레 지야게 되네 힘바데 도거래다 다 다른 거랑서 공도 해봐나 이래 당보 신덕게 되네 코완들 되네 농하지랑 이뭐 하고네 코와를 로도바 되네 제와스마 되네 라다 마에 데벨롬 주데다 탐지야 되네 벤 농하지랑 이봐 벤 쫑가고다 되네 대답 되네 농하 하고네 되네 제와 스마야 라마게 되니 대지 탐지야 되니 매어 심플랭 답더니 통네 든데리는 되니 코완들 로도 도용 거래 코완들 로도 용와이나 땅아랑게 되니 담배치 체단 된바 접용 거래 담배치 체단 된바 접용 와이나 되니 코완들 동아 코와다 동아 되니 타게 요레스 대답들 되니 추 람든 로와스 람가 만나봐 자꾸 요레스 대인데 챈다다 챈스만 니알라더니 그런 코알 로도 그래
So then he returned back to the world, and he broke up with his wife, and he became a monk, and he perfectly observed his vows. But then once the Buddha, in his absence, the Buddha made an announcement to all the other monks, and he said that this monk Jonggawo, his intention is impure, because he is only keeping his vows of discipline in order to be born in the God realm. So you should not associate with him. Don't even talk to him. Completely ignore him. And so then ever since the Buddha said that, no monk in a monastery would pay any attention to him. Nobody would talk to him. Nobody would even look at him. They would cover their faces, and they would completely, they would look down on him. So he became very sad and lonely. And so one day then the Buddha said to him, so now would you like to go on a trip to hell and look around there? And he says, sure, let's look around in hell. So then again the Buddha made a miracle, and they arrived in hell. And so he was walking around in hell, and he saw all those sentient beings being burned and boiled alive and being cut in pieces. So he saw the incredible suffering and was overcome by a great terror and horror in his mind. And so then he came across some of the henchmen in hell who were also doing their preparations, seemingly waiting for someone, being ready to cook whoever comes. And so then he asked them, so who are you waiting for? And they said, well, in the world now there is a brother of the Buddha, Chongawo, and he's just observing his vows because he wants to be born in a god realm. And so when he dies, he will be born in a god realm, and he will experience great bliss together with those goddesses. But then when that merit comes to an end, he will be born in hell, and then we will cook him in there. And so when he knew that, he knew they were talking about him, and he was overcome by terror. And so this is, they're talking about me, so this is what they're planning to do with me already. So then he came back to the human world, and he completely he gave up all his clinging attachment to the God realm. And so this is how he turned away from samsara altogether. So in this, for the happiness in this life and also all the future lifetimes. And so if we turn away our mind from samsara, then just like Chongawo, we should see all of samsara as suffering by nature. Even the future lives, even the happy existences of gods and humans. We should see them just like a pit of fire, or like an island of monsters or so. So if we see it in that way, any kind of place in samsara, then we are able to turn away our mind from samsara, and then we are able to practice the Dharma truly. And only if we practice the Dharma truly, we can become liberated from the suffering in samsara. And so then the Dharma has unmistakably become the path. So in order for the Dharma to become the path, we need to turn away the mind from samsara altogether, in also the happy existences in future lifetimes.
Lo doya ke lo ti che yo ma res ten de tin kho de dunga ran yin ri ndu yim do de ngarang ha ko yo re pen na ta chong go khrang ge gewa jpal ti ne tin hwa yo le che tu yo ba khrang ge ngus khrang ge sem na ne ta chu tu yo re nam je le su nam de se ne tin ngi song ye wa na che yo ba de yang khrang ge ha ko ngus me yin ba ke lab de ba ma yin ba khrang ha ko 하고와 대때니 다 그런 코안들 했더니 란이게 그런 코안들 로 연거다 닝봄이 하고 코안들 란이게 고 동아지란 yin 하고 가와송에요 동아지란 yin 봐 대지 탐지에 동아가 저인 봐 되는 그런 거 하고네 되니 거기 그런 게 되니 저봐 찹상 땅 두고 요래 대답지 안 속에 산지기 지금 가족의 남주 마시네 코완들 마시바이는 코완들 동하 미바이나 느게 요러와 된들 말해 봐 코완들 동하인 봐 마시장 안한돌 동하대 요래 코완들 동하인 봐 시나 고 시와나이 동하야 요래 시 마시 가리인자 고 동하네 동하라이 만나 좀 코완은 요네종데 동하대 요래 된두다 동아대 임바 하고인데 되니 동아래 탑라 되니 배고요레스 되니다 되니 가나도 답지시 영어다 dunga ke jo de karerindo deve jo de karerindo ta pena nganso tara nyawa che ke jo de karerindo yada ke che ke jo de karerindo me che ke jo karerindo so na nganso jo de rebe ni la tapjesi jo de rebe la tapjesi inde jimi che ke teni rebe jong sigayo ma jo mi na teni jo tan jimi na teni jumi jimi le jebe rebe chi yongyo ma teni 다른 거는 대도긴 소와 강요 바 대다 탐지야 지진을 되네 중고요레스 배는 거는 저 따라 다 세탕 세마탕지라 코랑라 담보 짜지야게 코랑라 줘야요 말이라 드니 코랑라 짜지야게 드니 콜라 찌양 요 말이 줘 미세도 콜라 찌양 용어 말이 대인도 코랑 짜뜨 남에 찌 듣고요 말이스 Sema ke tangala sema nanola
ade tabo
ande enda utam ande chiga maro sema ke tang yoro
sema ko shindo na ge yoro sema shindo na ge yoro de ke tang ka besade
ande de
tang ka yore tsage ge shin sema shin tsage ge mare
sema korang ne sema me mina
shindo maro
shin ji ne
ni shin ge yoro ba tang ina tang ka de ne yo maro ba
sema se tangsen sema me misa yoro sacha sa juni minjo sema jibo inde jo
sema sana center
sen sema na shinda ji ne
di sala gre
sala ga mai sema la gre khang
khai sana kam da la gre
kam da
ke mara
kholan ta chachin chang yo mare khole hing tang tara ji de ji ya khole jin chang yo mare de ma sang sa de ko na ji thu yo mare pe te na yin re 당하는 지 다양 사자 배 린신 존데 바 사자이나 근데 코랑 짜다 신가 지 용거요 코랑 지진이나 창대요 지진을 때는 코랑 창 야지 용거 지진 마창이나 지해요 말 배대다 그래 나는 지 다라 대도 강 요바 대다 탐지 지진을 때네 근데 나는 솔 대답은 레븐 용거요 배낭 나는 지 먼저 지 차이야 봐야나 남은로 지 차이야 봐야나 당하는 지 코랑 분치 인장 대랑아서 대도 만다 요래 제 주보 그때는 줍차야 만다 요래 남주 싫어하고 그때는 만다 요래 대다 탐지 은혜고는 파지바 마지바 럽종지바 차는데 찍바 차고 양도 지 요래데 찍바 용거요 말이 카카 용거 요래 타토지 가지 완탕야 만다 차용 거 그래서 가만히 용거 줘다 지 줘라 때는 레버 만다 차는 거 줘 가래리 대지지 요대 봐야나 대근 레버 gewa chikil tine tine dechi je topo yore dunga chi yu depa yena je me gewa chi hunu yu depa tine tan deba dunga chi topo yore ten tine kowa ko dunga ran yin ba te ya tine je me gewa la tine kowa de dunga je ran yin ba cha yung yore ten ta dunga tamche le talgona tine ngara chuke dunga tamche ge je de pang topo yore dunga ki je tamche pang go yo na 당한 수치 산지에 지 빵나게 내 띵제 바데 졌다가니 ngana sotini nyamnin chine tini de tini ngana sota donga tamchele trobe tab yong yores.
So if we do not see that all of samsara has the nature of suffering, then we will not turn our mind away from samsara. And so how we can understand that samsara has the nature of suffering is just like Chungabo had seen it through a personal experience, a personal seeing. So he had made up in his mind that when he observes those certain vows and he practices virtue, he can be born in the God realm. So he knew that because he saw that. But then likewise he saw that whenever that merit comes to an end, then he will fall into the lower realms, to hell. He also knew that, so he resolved that in his mind. And therefore, it is not just something that somebody told him, but the certainty arose because he personally witnessed that, he saw it, so he knew it. And from that knowledge, then, he was able to turn away his mind from samsara and really understand that samsara has the nature of suffering and has no essence. So no matter where you go in samsara, there is only the nature of suffering. So this is what he had realized. And because he saw that, he saw the causes for happiness and also the causes for suffering, he was able to change and transform. And so in the same way, if we also understand that samsara has the nature of suffering, then we can turn away our mind from samsara, and then we can engage in true practice. But if we don't really understand that samsara has the nature of suffering, then we will continue to abide, to live within suffering without any escape from there. So, but anyways, whether we know it or don't know it, samsara still has the nature of suffering. So even if it seems to us that there is no suffering, even if we are ignorant that there is suffering, there still is actually suffering. And whenever it comes to us, we will know it. And when it comes, then we will understand that it all has the nature of suffering. So whether or not we know it, there is always suffering in samsara. And so that is important to understand. And then once we understand that, then we can make an effort to find a way to become free from samsara, from suffering. And so in order to do that, we need to think about what really are the causes of suffering, what are the causes of happiness, what is it that causes hell, and what causes a hungry spirit, what is the cause to be born as a human. So we should think about that in terms of certain causes leading to certain corresponding results. And what it will show us is that there is nothing that could possibly exist that doesn't come from corresponding causes and conditions. So if the causes and conditions do not come together, then a certain result is impossible to appear. So whatever is our experience, all of our feelings of happiness and suffering and so on, they all arise from their corresponding causes and conditions. And if these are not complete, then a certain feeling cannot come about. For example, if you were to plant a tree in a dry sand, even if all the other conditions are there, but if the condition of the wet soil is not present, if the sand is dry, then not all the causes and conditions are there. So no matter what you do, there will be no tree that will grow because it is dry, can't grow. But then when you plant it in a wet soil, in a wet climate, and all the causes and conditions for this tree to grow come together, then only then it will grow. And so in the same way, all of our experiences of happiness and suffering, our experiences are fully ripened results of various corresponding causes and conditions that have come together. So for example, when you look at one family, like the children that are born to one family, even though they are born to the same parents and they have the same education and the same background, upbringing, they still turn out so different. Their experience of life is different. The way they experience happiness and suffering is different. And their bodies, their health will be different. And their degrees of intelligence also will be different. They just will not turn out the same. Even though they're born to the same parents, they are very different. And then later in life, some are more successful, some are less successful. So why is that if they're born to the same parents with the same background? It is because they are different, they differ in their causes and conditions, and therefore there is a diversity of results and experiences. So whenever they experience happiness, then it is the cause of that was a virtue that they have practiced. And if they experience more suffering, it is because in the past there is a cause of non-virtue. And so all the suffering in samsara comes from these causes of non-virtue. And if we want to become free from suffering, then we also must give up the causes of suffering. And so therefore the Buddha showed to us what are the causes of suffering, what do we need to do, and what do we need to give up. And then if we take that and practice accordingly, then abandoning the causes of suffering, we will become free from suffering. Any questions?
So what's are the causes of being born in the as a hungry spirit? What karmic actions will cause you to be born as a hungry spirit?
Oops.
Hungry ghost.
Yeah. Gita Kagyu Kararis.
Yedal chia ke jet nyomumba. Nyomumba.
Chitang Yamumba.
Nyomumba ke nani teni senna shukimbo jeya patni teletini yedal jiyo sungudus.
So the cause of being born as a hungry spirit is first of all affliction, afflicted state of mind, and of the various afflictions, especially the affliction of greed or stinginess.
Ta senna telayang mangbo yongore penna ngarang ke pamjo la senna se de ba chikpo ke yedal chia chapuyo mane ngarang ke jonor de pichu matang ma che taphi go ne penna ngarang ke pamjo la ngarang ke senna chinya cha che de na yedal chia kable khapo ros yedal chia jo senna jo da senna se pa cham ko yedal chia ro ma ba senna ga dani ngarang ke pamjo senna chi pichu matang ma che me yin ke pamjo le tini ngarang ke pichu ma bo tang de na tini de table sa na tini yedal chia ro
Pena ngarang bantu chiyo na, matera sena chempo chiyo na, ti chibu gida kiga mare.
Te jeji mare. Je tang korang ke lesa yoro wa.
Yina mi shen de pecho tang.
Ta me yin ke pamjo le tini nga ke pichu tang yoro wa.
So also, when for example, if you accumulate a lot of wealth and a lot of things, and then you try to protect your wealth, then that alone is not what causes you to be born as a hungry spirit. But what actually is the cause of birth as a hungry spirit then is if you do have all this wealth, but you don't want to make use of it, you want to keep it for yourself, and actually you're using somebody else's wealth while you're holding on to your own wealth, then that becomes the cause for hungry spirit.
Yang ngarang su chi ngarang ke tsupam jo drum di magi wa mang po shedang go ne drum, chada go ne drum. Ta tende ke chi magi wa mang po ke tene nga ke pam jo tsu drum ya ne. Tene ti pam jo te che yin la tene nga ke chi yin ba tang ya. Tende ke re kaya ma je we che ne ta sen na ke yin ba chen po che de ba yin na tene yang ye da le chi hiyo res.
Or for example, if we accumulate all this wealth, and so then also we do that accumulation, we do that with many other afflictions, for example with anger, aggression, and then with jealousy, we gather all this wealth, and then once we have it, and we are not willing to share that with others, or we are not willing to help the needy with our wealth, even though we could, and we try to anyways keep it for us, then that also is the cause for hungry spirit.
Yang anando tara kakshelo ko mashe nguni ko yodara wo yores mashe nguni kanti yoresena ngana masaya malatende yore ngaso tende tapji chera juno lomchu chembo yujang tene ngarang ke chi dolo ina goma wa chi samayena ta samawa ta dodina ngarang pango na yisine ta tendrikin sowa chuni yore 다 드다 탐지 양콘 두총 초식이 때니 찌는 되게 된들 많이 봐 나랑 비주가 땅 마와네 다 신나게 찡네 신나게 찡네 사 마와치 고 마와치 다 강당 나랑 강야 비주 땅 마와치 대대 봐이나 대 그런 것이 여다로 차대요 그래서.
So actually we can already be hungry spirits before we die as human beings already. For example, an experience of a hungry spirit before we have died in his life is, for example, if you have all this wealth, for example, we have nice clothes and we have good food to eat and so on, and we are so stingy about it that we never actually want to use it. We live almost like beggars. We never use what we have. We don't want to defile our clothing, so we don't even want to wear it, or we want to be careful not eating too much food, so we don't actually eat anything. We nourish our bodies, so we are very stingy about losing even the slightest thing we already have. So that actually, in this life already, is being like a hungry spirit.
I had a question about the story about the man who wanted to be a monk, and the Buddha had realized that he had been a pig in future life, circumambulating. And the question is about intention and virtue, because the pig had no intention of any virtue, but he just happened to be rubbing himself against the stupa. So I wonder how that works with virtue when there's no intention. It seems like it's still as beneficial.
박바디 뒤dom디 여러와 박바디 코랑으로서는 기베 근로요 말아와 코랑 다 주든 계성 코랑 갑들 퍼서 그때 근로요 말아와 그 기베 도 근로요 말아와 시리 칸 고쳐 말아와 티나 주든 가서 기베서 그 근로나 라글레기 여래 또 발라고 여러와 그 근로디 요 말아와 그는 티니 코랑 기베디 칸다 차가 여래
다 코랑라 제바 쓰는 것도 시에 용거로 반제 제바 쓰는 시에도 다 간다 코랑게 주딘들 꼬라 잡야 찍다 주딘데 개버스미야겠다 코랑라 수난지 랩선다 코랑라 공홍 미장 코랑라 드리지 고갑 랩선으로 와 고갑 랩선데 장르스 장볼은 데선다 코랑라 데이터 레와 미장 데레한테 장볼은 데선데 드니딘 레버데다 라인기 톱연 거예요 다 코랑라 공홍 땅에 주딘데 드리지 지고 삼바 개버스음고 삼바 tenen chudin de kora jamna ene suna sanji machapa thom do yore yene kora suna chung jing se top yo mare was suna chung me se top yo mare te ta suna chung top ya te ta te kol konong mi jang tan re ya ba te te suna de top yores
so it is true we talk about the intention that determines how great is our virtue. And so this pig, when it rubbed its back on the stupa, didn't have the intention, obviously, to do anything virtuous. But we talk about a karmic connection, like a good connection, a positive connection to the Dharma. So it did make a connection to the Dharma, a positive connection. Through this positive connection, then he also possessed a certain root of virtue, of merit in his mind, because there was a positive connection. And so then, of course, it was a slight connection because it didn't have any intention of doing anything good. For example, if the pig would have had a great intention, really being conscious that this is a stupa and this is, I venerate this, so I rub my back, like, in veneration to the stupa, then it would be actually an incredible and much more powerful virtue than that. But even just to make any good connection to the Dharma already has some root of virtue.
And so that's why we would play mantras for animals. It gives a connection even if they don't understand it.
이때에서 돈돌란 옌바다 보다 라게 여러와 하마 코너양 딘딘르베
저리 찍어지잖아 다 나랑 게 삼바데 힌게 거네 되네 삼바데 힌게 거네 되네 나랑 게 치다 레킹 잡스 팀바게 되네 콘초스나 되네 소반데네 다 코란 수치 레지드 바자야나 되네 나랑 게 몰람 뎁트지 호아치 요데 코란 돌 틴틴 핀 토고 여래
So exactly, we can benefit sentient beings or animals, for example, in that way, and especially if we say these mantras or we do these prayers for them with the intention to that later that they will become, we will plant the seed, and that later they will become liberated from suffering. So if we dedicate and pray for them with a good intention like that, then definitely they will benefit from that later.
So it's more of a cause and effect than it is. Say magic or superstition, but it actually is like cause and effect.
The Guran Devota would have your Vade, Gulonde, Takasik, Tumtrada Marava.
Jet Deva Yoris, Chishin and Deva Yorika. Koranki Mus, Jim Masajang Penang Ansotara Namkan in Chapamba, Chapaba, Telatine, Korank Zishing method to Genova. chapa korang la jo yo ma de yin yang ko sala le man sa du ranging sa cha tela pin thon ro tela tin se hing ye yo res
Juyo masane kun lo yo mare.
kol ko yo ma res
So exactly, it's it follows. It's because of cause and effect that this happens. So, for example, when it rains from the sky, then the rain doesn't actually have an intention to make anything grow, but that's just its nature. When the moment it touches the ground and it meets the seed, it will cause it. It will help it to grow.
Ending sa da penna ngarang sota tundro jing ngarang ga nam ta chon shimen ro tin yu na teni te ngarang ke nam cha yo ro was te ngani cha ta ngani rewa yo munjin rewa la tini ko ta nga dabong chet dabong nga cha de yo dabong nga cha andu teni nge khran la ho mo la tin de ba yin na ho mo la tin wa yin na nga samba de ning ji konjo sun de yi chi ta san ji ge nim ta le tini ko la 강화 간상지 핀통으로 그러다.
So, for example, we have.
대양코 지진띵도 창로. 내가 지진띵도 창로여래서.
So, for example, we have pets, for example, like a cat or a dog or something, and we care for them, so they actually become part of our family. And that also is because before already, from past lives, we have a connection to them. So now in this life, they are also part of our family. And since we are then you're the owner of the dog, for example, and you as the owner of the dog, you again dedicate and pray for the well-being, the happiness of the animal in the future. Then again, you are creating those causes and conditions that again will connect to like a better a birth later on, a better connection later on. So this, all of these relations follow really an interdependent relation.
How the prayer works in the cause and effect? Because it seems like other beings would follow their own karma, and there are these teachings that prayer is going to have great benefit, but let's say first this takes space, let's say someone who's pray, because prayers may not know it, be completely unaware. It's like someone else is praying. But how, based on cause and effect, it would impact.
Yang le jumre ina tini ngam khorama lam gyam no tik khona kharep khane phengre kan soso min go yorwa tini khoran soso min go yorwa tini nga khoran lam lam gyam na tini di nag le da wacha yorwa nga le yorwa te lam de tini khoran la khane phengre di le jumre da ba khane do lam de
ngani jewa yor ro
so
tapena tundo ta ngani jewa yor
ne
tundo ta ngani legend jewa yor legend jewa yor sa nge mona jem na khona pin to kher legend jewa mina ngani tuk tuk yo mare
ne kram lam khane phengre khona le jumre na kai khoti la bra khom lam ti khrang le rwa khrang le ti khrang thola mingi yo marwa khrang le mingi rwa
ale
kram lam ti khrang la phengre rwa khrang le rwa
pena nge ti sing to de khona te ba ina khona tu go ja ping re
re ina ya mön lam rwa
re khol ping re ba pin to yo re ba
re ina thala marwa mön lam de
chala ro cha yong ipo ro cha yong ro
ti khot de de rwa khandas cha thala da
ngara tu sanji ki chulo ke tene she yong ro ba ta lende ki tene she yong de upo dog do ro chi tin yong go yo ma ko nupa ro chi tin yong go ro ba
mön lam kin nupa
mo lang ke nupa ke tene she yong go pena ngara tu le gewa hi ba te nupa chi yo re ma to ngara tu tan thung ya ta zong zong ya yo ma le me gewa hi ba te la ya ngara tu tan thong ya ta tene zong zong ya yo ma yina nam ki khorang ke nupa te ka mi yong go di na yiri nga ke mo lam te yang khorang nupa chi yo re nupa te la ti ne khorang la yang pin to ya chi cha yong go re
First of all, you have a dog, for example, and a pet. So first of all, you meet with this animal because you already have a karmic connection. So in this way, you can give things. For example, you can feed the animal. You can do things that help the animal, and because you have the karmic connection. If you wouldn't have the karmic connection, there would be you wouldn't meet with the dog, and the dog would not receive any food from you. So that is because of the karmic connection. And then also, when we pray for them, for example, it is not just like a material thing that we like something that we give to somebody, but actually how karma is created is not through passing on material things, but actually it's like an energy, like a force that is generated by a certain act, by a certain feeling that arises. And so that certain force leads to a certain result. It's like a force that arises that is a continuum leading to a certain result. So if the virtuous thought arises to do something beneficial, like to do a prayer, then like a virtuous energy arises that will be brought to lead to a certain karmic connection. So then that is received by somebody else. Like how do you say, it's like an energetic current reaching other beings. So not like a thing that actually is passed on to somebody. It's more like a continuum that that keeps moving and ripening. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Penna nga ke loju je shina nyan chechin chi jamso na chi yote katan hi ma song chi hi sam. Mu jagal ri sanji sha yu but ndri ji ke kabla chu chung chung ji yore chu chung na nya chap mang bo yore. Nam shi le chat kam lo yore da. Nam shi le chat kam nya ta sho yong yore. Ta lungba tela yu de ba chungba chimbo ji yore. Chungba chimbo te khora samba de hinji chimbo yore. Samba de hinji chimbo yu ndu tene khora ke langboche te du langboche biju tang yore. Langboche le chaka ane ta ba ko ge nya de jin chat lo yore. Tende chene jong bo chan ta nam jel ko chat ta lok tu yo ma ta. Lam te lok ma hab la tene ta nya de ton chen yo ko ta. Ta nya sha yin ba ta chu ndu tene khora ke tapsi yin ba kan yo ma. Tapsi yin ba kan yo me de tene khora ke ta sampada tsewa gone tene khorang chola phin thoya ge chide tene sanje gen chinga sanje gen chin khorang ge molang ta ne khorang chola te khorang chog na chole thu sone na chole thu wala tine nya te dan chama ta da la yele che sone is
Chin chigre
sanje gen chin dang lo sanje gen chin dang
So also another story from the old times in India. There was once a lake. There were many fish in the lake, and so then slowly the lake was drying out. So the fish were destined to die, and so then there was a merchant who was very compassionate and who didn't want them to die. So he tried to help to sustain the lake. So at that time they had elephants. So he made his elephant carry lots of water and keep pouring the water into the lake so it doesn't dry out. And so he was doing that for a long time until it became clear that there is no way to stop the lake from drying out, because one day he will not be able to pour in more water. And so it's not sustainable. So he was thinking, what can he do to help them in a sustainable way, because eventually it is inevitable that the lake will dry out. And so then so then he, with great love and compassion, he was, with a wish to benefit them, he was reading this name mantra of a Buddha. What's the name of this? Ratna Tsukta. Was it Tsukta? No, was it Ushnisha, no? Yeah, Ratna Ushnisha, I guess. You know? No. Yeah, I think it's Ratna Ushnisha. So then he spoke this name of this Buddha to them, and all the fish heard this name, and so then the lake dried out and they died, and then all of those fish were born in the God realm.
Tene nya Quran sola yang Tendrik redo kang yo mare. Tendrik korang ngwa mona chi yo. Yina yang korang tara chongba chimbo te samba de nyingje sanje kin singha ge nipa la te ne korang so la yo le che so re. Nya su korang so kang che yo mare. Yina yang ta tel ngang so jijin tin do yo mare la go na tel jijin tin do yo re. Kare se na nya bam tha ma bo sa che yin ban chon de yo re de taw ko kab ra ge yo mare. Ta ti na ne che de be nya te ta chongba te korang so ngun je le jin re wa yo re ta. Le jin re wa yo ba la te ne Tereng nyate la korang ke pa pin to go ya kita dewa yores nyate so muni jasa cha yores tele tene tereng kokap kinte tena leb yores jijin tena the yore tele tene nyala mona tab nya la yele je ya ta tende ke jijin temro jong go yore pe ti na yere nga so chi semkin kanditi la nga so dewa chi yu de ba yena te ngun je dewa chi le gen dewa chi le tene taran the yong go the yong de tela ngarang ki sambo chena o ngimpa chena te yang hunje lege tene dewa tina yi chayo gore tela samba go ni nga ke tsewa go ni tene sanji kin singa da ya ta tende je ba yena ting korang la pin thong yo res.
And so also these fish actually didn't have any kind of virtuous intention or any kind of faith into that Buddha. They just actually heard the name of the Buddha without any other intention. But still they were born in the God realm, and just to hear the name of the Buddha is also because those fish had already a karmic connection to this person. If they wouldn't have the connection, they would never meet with this person, this compassionate person who would tell them the name of the Buddha. And because there's many fish most fish who just die without ever meeting this opportunity, because they don't have this karmic connection. So they had a certain karmic connection, a certain positive karmic connection already, and because of that cause, it led to the condition of this merchant or this compassionate person telling them the name of the Buddha, and that again led them to be born in the God realm, even though they didn't have the intention. So even if the intention is not there, it is because of certain causes that are already present that we encounter an animal, for example, and then if we benefit them, we tell them the mantras of the name of the Buddha, then definitely we can bring benefit to them. Can we take a break for 10 minutes?
nothing is acted out or indulged, it simply passes. Does this change the karma?
So it comes up, but you don't do anything about it, right?
Left as it is until it dissolves.
The nyomong balle kan la gore that you chena le mingi yorwa nyomong ba yorwa dine samjala pena nyomong ba ge na yang dine kontis de ge yona yang ra samnala ine yang lega khaya ma chena le ta ba khaya ma sana lunga gi le ta bro khaya ma sana dine korang ta namshi korang me ba yang men ro bro dine tin le khana ta bro
le magi walang do
lega ma chena
chitang an magi wal korang la chechong yo pena magi wan ro chi yana pe ji yana ngang ke magic la shedang lang shedang te goning mat se go samba ka loche te ten ten mat us se se tang ngang ke su so samba ta ko nong tende ji ke so yana ta nga simba na chi nga goya de le ka de drip song samba ke ta simba ji chong so yana ta te mage wa chimbo cha res ta ngarang ke mud su go samba lo che wa yana us ma se wa yana koran la mage wa te yin la cha chang wa jin zo mi yo ma res te ni te mage wa te la ya te mage wa chung chung cha ba res te yina 간단히 지나 수고 삼로 깨와 삼치나 대 먹이와 차 찌차레스 뇨모바 찌차레스 뇨모바 찌차네 정도 거 먹이와레스.
So once the affliction arises and then is in the mind, like even if you actually don't do anything about it, there's still some non-virtuous karma from that. But there's different levels of non-virtuous karma to different degrees. So a very heavy negative karma is, for example, when an affliction of anger arises, you get extremely angry at someone, and you feel like you want to kill them, and so then you have this intention, and then there's this other person, and then you do the act, you kill the person, and then after you killed, then you feel satisfied that you fulfilled your intention. So that would be a complete, like a full act of killing. So that would be the worst kind of killing then. So that's the most grave kind of like negative karma then in that sense. And so then on the other hand, if same kind of anger arises and you feel like killing the other person, but then you hold yourself back and you just don't do anything, then it's much weaker. It's a much weaker negative karma, but just that they have, for example, wishes to kill somebody, that in itself is also negative, so it has a negative impression in the mind, but it is not as powerful as actually acting out on it.
This is unrelated to some of the teachings we've been doing today, but I'm thinking of this gentleman over here who, as I understand today, is his 49th day in the Bharata. So, conceptually or literally, does he go into some type of rebirth tomorrow in some other realm?
Then meet the drawing yorwa, titering nima shipchu shiko charwa. Then it in the kung getcha shipchu shiko reves part of the river. Nima shipchu shiko tering river, drongne. Then yinchi minchik that nima shipchu shiko reves.
Luliala.
The Benalulayana didn't takta pe Danka Kenzara, shipchu shiko se. Then it inchi minchi korang sunning. Penasani was running Limangap to our child, Kotsara, the Nibado. Then it could get a Kosan Yeva Shen Land over.
Tang Harangate Sarbo Shimi, Courageous and a Ying number shipa, Tong to Kumado. Number shipa, Manton Satini, Crans, Luca, the Lingu Batang, a leg, Kawalaki and you, but Tong to Kumados. 얘네야 샤마 깊지 시가 시바데 땅 안에서 쌍하게 용는 송용 거래. bên 눈차를 코란솔라더니 바던 차차 mandaware tene sung with telati and the shama gibji shaganani pardog and chacha sama koran chandogor chanetini ti tenita lilent buyoba tendrian sunguyores shama gibta pardo sama chatsarba koran lilent buyoba sunguyore the young yong kahi sanjigi chulo yong kahi nana tene ta ngarangke le mangbo sapa lengi pa mangbo sane tini litin le mahamne lo saya ta dongsar mangbo la pardola ne de pa yang tendri yang song yo res to so yang song yo yo res yang kahi tekba chimbo se yuni to so shama hibji she go mari ko shuma tane tegara na ma nyewa na chen do nyen yo yo res yang gewa sunam top chimbo chen ni to so yang shama hibji she go mari yang koran so lamsa dewa chen do ni to so yang yo yo res 다 야마 입지 시에게 써야 돼. 쪼게 찍다 저거로. 쪼보지 망 내처때 망와인 베찬이다 된지 성유사레스.
미마 남시 망셔봐.
망이셔다 된지 연구유사레스.
So first of all, personally, I don't know exactly like where this person will be born and where the consciousness exactly is. Because also I don't have this clairvoyant power to see the consciousness and their karma. So in this individual case, I can't really tell the whereabouts of the consciousness. But then in general, in the tantric texts, it is said in some of them it is said that like in general there are throughout 49 days, which are 7 weeks. In those 7 weeks, each week, there is a certain visions that become appear to the consciousness, and that the consciousness goes through. So every week that these visions change, and there's all kinds of manifestations that appear to them. And then once they have all appeared, then the consciousness will again take birth. And so then, however, in some other scriptures, it is said that it is also not so certain when exactly we will take birth. For example, in some scriptures it mentions consciousnesses that due to some certain negative conditions, they actually are not born after 49 days, but they spent even millions of years in the bardo, and they're in a way stuck in the bardo, and they can't become liberated in the sense that they can't take birth. So then there's those also. But then in some other scriptures yet it says there is also those who don't even have to go through all the 49 days. So for example, somebody who has been extremely sinful, has done great non-virtue, they might be born in the hell realms the moment they die without even going through the bardo. And then there's others who might have practiced great virtue, and also they don't have to go through the bardo, and they might be born very quickly in Dewa Chen, in the great bliss realm. So there's various accounts on that, but the reason why now the number 49 or the 7 weeks are mentioned is because probably in most cases, in an average we can say, for most consciousnesses, they would be reborn after those 49 days, except for some exceptional cases.
Thank you.
So, in adjunct to the dealing with an afflictive thought when it rises up. So if the thought comes up, though, like an angry thought, like, oh, my dog pooed on my plant and I'm mad. Okay, let's just say that's the thought. But I recognize this thought has no nature. It's not solid. I can't touch it. It's empty in nature, and I recognize that in the moment. And then the anger dissolves. It's gone, and I just think, oh, what's the most beneficial thing to do? I'll clean up the poo, right? Is there any karma created from the original momentary thought, or does it then get transmuted because its nature is recognized?
So first there's the thought, it stays a little bit, right? But then you just change it around, you transform it, and you just clear away the...
Recognize that it's not substantial.
but it stays there for a little bit. Yeah?
Okay, we'll give it a second. I really want to see if this creates karma.
Okay.
It's a second.
A second, okay.
Literally, like it's a habitual thought. Maybe
It
it's
just
not
comes up.
even my thought. Maybe it's the neighbor's thought. It's just a
Reaction.
it's a passing that quickly, but will
Okay.
that still create a karmic response, or is it transmuted to something beneficial? Does that make sense? Okay, thanks, Ina.
Then benang 시당 통통질라나 benang 치디콩 메토강라 작바당나 녀비르바 메타 톨란서 오르바 then morangta kacha chikla kichikla lunglang rwatala chitala then yine ho lamsa main do ro yang namto ti thoya yamari chi choya mari samgarwa lamsa neng gyon do re then ta le goya de le gra pen chakpa de chamazo urwa tinda urwa tinda le goya de le then le de urwa then namto de meba chak charwa then kichikla kacha chikla ra shade ge marwa namto de lung de urwa then ti lung di le khare le yorwe
치랑 까차찍라 치랑 해당 지 제송이나 텔레 빠पर 레위요레스 ngaranso 까차찍이나 ngaranso 멘단로 벤나 ngaranso 맘라고 지요나 까차찍이나 뭐 사야만 뭐 세트야 네바 요레스 까차코라 퉁퉁 말이 까차대 가르치는 비주단요레스 지나나 까차찍라 먹게베 똑바치는다 텔 먹게바데 렘데 요레 된 데버들 동하요 거요레 지랑 까차찍라 기블 로치바이나 텔 빠빠야 지나나 기베 데버 대와야 요레스 코라 데도 코라 만디바 코라 데도 만디바 코라 요레스 게데 간데요 제바이나 데버 때다 코 만디바 용거 요레스 까차찍 퉁퉁 말해 봐 까차찍이 되는 내가 자친보야 레트비요레 당 알아서 까차찍이 나네 산지적 곰팡이 까차찍이 나네 톱투보요레스 다랑 알아서 지 다른 잠pan 신주 나나 끼찍찍을 족상지에는데 끼찍찍잔데 까차 찍대 되니 소 두겨 탐바세 바테 끼찍 차거든 든드게 내갑더니 샘지 뭐뭐 통소나 까차 두겨대 끼찍찍 차거로 까마마리
끼찍이로
끼찍이로와
코라나 차시
코랑 차게 두겨 까차 차게 두겨대 끼찍찍 차로 다 끼찍찍을 조상지에는데 끼찍찍을 샘지 내로 또나 대가 하나 상지에는
끼찍디 차시 독초 여바데라
네.
So there still will be a karmic result. But then in proportion to whatever has arisen. So whatever arises, in proportion to that, there will be a corresponding result, even if it is just for an instant, for just a moment. And so actually, even though we call it just a second or like a moment, actually we can do a lot of things in a second. For example, somebody who is very angry can drop a bomb in a second and kill like hundreds and thousands of people. It's a question of a second. It happens all in a second. So very powerful things can be done in a second. And actually, we can also attain enlightenment in a second, which is also another powerful thing we can do in just a very short moment of time. And so, but in basically whatever arises has a corresponding result. And so in the same way, with the negative thought that arises, even if you just have a second of virtue in your mind, that also in proportion to that second, there will be a corresponding result of happiness ripening in a very similar way. So actually a second is quite a significant time already. Actually, in the text it is mentioned, well, first of all, in the Manchushri Namasamgiti it is said that in an instant, which is like a second, in an instant you are a Buddha, in another instant you are a sentient being wandering in samsara. And so then what we call a second seems very short to us, but actually in the text it mentions that each second, or in the text it's called an instant, can be broken up into 60 smaller instances. So 1 second consists of like 60 like smaller seconds, like small seconds. I call it milliseconds something. And so if you take 1 second that consists of these smaller instances, it seems to be already quite a long time actually that can fulfill something very powerful. And so therefore whatever we do in each moment, whatever arises, it will have a corresponding result.
당아랑서 남주 인데 데데요나 셰당 양 맞지 셰당 양 맞지 차도 장 맞지 누차 장 맞지 된르게 라파 근 소와 강야 미네 가서 데데 바이나야 까차르기는 가서 레산도 요레스 가르르세나 가랑서 셈게 내록된 통요 말해 셈게 내록된 만촌다도 고다랑 가서 뜨목세야다 디노나 내데요다 그 뇨몬바 라파 마치짱 뇨몬바 라파 마치짱 드리 뜨목되게 그 디나나 가서 내데요레스 땡디 그 까차르기는 가서 레산도 요레스 레 침보사 그 말데 레 충충산도 요레스.
And so actually even if we are quite subdued, so even if we at any given time we are not actually afflicted, even if there is no strong anger arising or no attachment or no jealousy, even if those strong afflictions actually are really absent, if you're quite subdued, we still accumulate negative karma second by second or moment by moment because we are ignorant and because we have not seen the nature of the mind. And not seeing the nature of the mind is being controlled by ignorance, and ignorance is non-virtuous. So for as long as we don't see the nature of the mind, we are actually continuously accumulating negative karma of ignorance.
상제 맞으세야돼 셈제 내용 통만 더 뒤에는 통로요. 근데 셈제 내용 통소만이나 근데 당가서 또 된가안도 그래. 근데 상마 이시제도 그래. 이시 차대요레스. 셈제 내용만 통만이나 말하는 뇨몬바 또바 라파미자 근데 뇨몬바게 또바 차와요레. 주 자와데 또목게 zon데요레. 또목게 zon사데 근데 되게양 콜레 Dili magevele sane, dili nga su tang khowandala, khondu ya ke tsawate, tang nga su nelo ke thoma tene, dili khowatel topin khoko yores.
So unless we see the nature of the mind, we will not attain enlightenment. So only when we really transcend ignorance, unawareness, and we see the nature of the mind, we attain enlightenment, and then the mind becomes wisdom, a primordial wisdom. We realize the primordial wisdom mind. But until we have realized this primordial wisdom, the nature of the mind, we still are not seeing the mind, we are ignorant, under the power of ignorance. And even though we might be quite subdued and we might not have a lot of coarse afflictions like anger and jealousy and attachment and so on, but because we are still ignorant and we do not see the nature of the mind, we continue to wander around in samsara over and over again.
20 minutes, left 20 minutes.
It's fine, Rinpoche. We have this room until 6 o'clock. But we need about maybe 45 minutes we have to switch rooms to that room for tomorrow. So after we finish today, we have to leave.
Konso kambati chiwo gyakorwa. Kambati chuti tukpa partolarwa. Yina yang konso ti tsangma zoela. Kambat chalatsma bogorwa. Sanin telat gachuya esomarwa. Hina yore. Chalatsma boela kamba shipchushinga ko.
Oh yeah. Tani nga ta jirang kama nyeshela gomjaya ko labuseyate pache lamen diksarwa.
And can come.
Morang tende labu labsakach. Morang tende labs.
So you requested before maybe to give some instructions on meditation instructions. So maybe the remaining 20 minutes we will do that.
And then, ta zowa chirang chusol de bakabla chusol nyamngi chi de morangi yin labs loma tamji yorwa. Koran loma group yorwa. Then teda tamji ge namju koran so gom jaya ta gorwa. Ti chi de yin labs morangi. Te namju chirang so nyamni ma khatse chal chi yo.
When you meet as a group, as a group together at the center, how many people are about come together to meditate normally?
Anywhere between 3 and 6, maybe. But we're hoping to have more people come. And that's why we want to have the meditation instruction.
Good wish.
Yeah, the meditation instruction is specifically for some people who come who don't understand deity practice and they need some introduction.
Like how to meditate on the deity, is that
Well,
kind of it, or not?
just the basic.
More like shamatha.
Right. But so people who don't, they
Who
just
don't
can't-
practice the deity.
Right. So we need
Yeah.
an introduction for them.
La kashe la nyam chi yom ro sarpa. The concept la mo go wa ro. Shine chi ko kom ne la. Ti ko ye so de. Shine ko ni da ra.
Shine go ne te go se.
Shine.
But Rinpoche, because we don't have a Lama here, we don't have a teacher, so we thought this would be a good opportunity for Rinpoche to give a presentation on basic meditation instruction, and we can use that later, to show new students.
Paje hakos. Understand. Not bad my English. Da gom jayate ta kichimbo chayong yor. Same ke ngaran so ta same ke tena ta kangi mampo yona kangi te ma shegona yanle kangi te le thargona tene gom jama hibeyina kangi te le thartuko yo mare kangi te le shektuko yo mare gom yabo ja shewanyina ta kangi ko khandi inja kangi ko khandi inja kangi te mi patang ro ta te gom khora ke ni patang gom khora ke yonti te res.
So meditation practice is really very important because we always encounter many difficulties in our mind. We have a lot of we suffer mentally, and so in order to become free from these forms of mental suffering, if we don't meditate, then we can't really be free from mental misery. But if you know how to meditate well, then no matter what difficulty it is, no matter what problem it is, you can liberate that problem. So that is the special power or the quality of meditation.
Ta gom tambo ja ngaran so ta zubo te kapto de goya ta tin sungu yore namnang chudun tini chan namnang chudun china labi na tisarwa pena zubo tambo de ba kangba dorji chudum jawa tini san nyamja tini meg natsila ta de ba megma natsila ta de ba che yakin la jaw tene tapung ba guryo ta jawa san ande chikta tene gatsing data sang ta tendge koran namna chudun ta zubo te nyami ya tan ta
Dumba de karare.
kangpa dorji chitom reida
Ma de tok to kamba lakpa
on rimba in sango
dumba.
다 teni te se zugbo de se nyam se zugbo de lulu sene ta de yo kare ndo dina ta te da de go ya kare sina za long sem sene sum shi ngore koran sum jewa yores koran sum jewa yonde dambo za de 장보 요나 za 장보 요나 de long tang 식 za tang long tang long tang na sem tang sitini sem ne tu yeres 대교 된 거는 남남 주도인 시바데 다 고고요 에스 조보 냠이 야시도 돼 근데 조보도 하장게 쟁하나서 담보야만 해 봐 술루 이유바 들고
So first, when we begin to meditate, we first should assume a proper physical posture, which we call the 7-point posture of Vajrayana, which the most important part of that is to have a straight back, a straight spine, and then also the legs are in a cross-legged position, and the hands are in meditation posture, and the eyes gaze to the space on the level of the tip of your nose. And then the tongue is slightly curled up towards the upper palate in the mouth. And then the shoulders are extended, so you pull them back, so your back becomes completely straight. And then your chin is slightly tucked in. And so also your neck is straight. And it's important to sit in a relaxed way. And this position is important, especially the straightness of it is important, because when the body is straight, then your channels also are straight, and the channels and the winds in the mind are strongly connected. So when the channels are straight, then also the winds will move straight, and when the winds are straight, then the mind is straight in a sense that it abides still. So then the most important point, therefore, is the straightness of the 7-point posture. And so then when you sit in this posture of meditation, it is still important not to sit too tight, like constrained, but to sit in a relaxed way.
tene ta ngaran so shine sena tene simte shwa yimba te tina net patele tene shine la boyo ta namju ngaran so simte shine chakyo ma namju shine ma chane kare chigyo simte ta ngupo nelo korang semju ngupo nelo korang sheneri de yine yang ngaso te ha mawa bachi nambar to ba ke yon ro ta nam to ke yone ne mara bachi ngujo jan ro ta samsang la devan so samsam dong ha ke nam to ta nam to gring da mara mangbo yor bang na to nam to den chba na yore samsam nam to ra pa yore samsam nam to chawa yore ta nam to Latine, teni ngarang same de la, ta dedoge. Dedogun sorwate, dun trapana ita, the mangbo yondu res. De Latine, teni ngagel same ye la detang mi pa. Ta tende chan over. Tene, ta te chung kawan in yungu yores, naso gom jama shiva tang. Same yungu nelo, same koran rangi thing as hama or Latine. Teni te tab. 대 답지 연구요레스 다 현에 센데 가르치 연구스 현에 시 연구qab라 다 셈데 혀 가르치 뇽문 남버도 봐 남도 망보 대마미 빠차 연구다 남도 미 빠차 연구이나 다데 셈 혀와 대qab라 셈 혀와 차들 ne sendu tini simhwa de tingna tini juningpo de thaba ta tani chayo ta juningpo kare chin de thubus namdo king gujo cha thuyo ma ta telishine la fyores ta de tab shine gomna phinto kare chung fyores na ta sem기 뇽모분 남도 탐지 마 현데 텔레티네 테니 데독인 찬낭 탐지 셔용 거다 데독인 찬낭 현데 다 동아 미바 차용 건도와 셈라 힙데스 야 차용 것도 쇼와다 데와 테니 갑데 차용 요레스
So the meaning of shamatha literally is like a peaceful abiding. And so peaceful because actually the nature of the mind is peaceful. And then it is to abide within that peaceful nature of the mind. And normally we do not abide peacefully. And why we do not abide peacefully is because even though our true nature, the actual nature of the mind is actually peaceful, we don't know that, and because of that we are constantly disturbed by many thoughts that arise. Many thoughts move the mind, and therefore the mind never stays still. It never can stay. It always is moved and disturbed or stirred up. And so sometimes we have thoughts of great joy. Another time we have miserable thoughts. We have all kinds of thoughts coming up all the time, just like dust particles flying around. And so sometimes they are more coarse, sometimes they are more subtle. But we are constantly tossed around between happiness and suffering and all kinds of feelings that arise, like dust particles. And because of that stirring in the mind, the body and the mind never actually can abide in peace and in happiness. And the problem is that we don't know how to meditate. That is why we are always somehow disturbed, because we do not rest in the natural state of the mind. We don't know the nature of the mind. And so when what calm abiding or this peaceful abiding means is, what is the peaceful here? It is that when you come to the peaceful nature of the mind, then all those many afflicted thoughts are pacified. So they calm down and you come to the peaceful natural state of the mind. And then the abiding of the peaceful abiding is then to remain within that peaceful nature for a long time. And you can remain for a long time if you are not moved by various thoughts that stir the mind. So that is the meaning of calm or peaceful abiding. And the benefit of practicing this meditation is that all the thoughts, the afflicted thoughts, are pacified, and then all the various perceptions and feelings of happiness and suffering and so on, they all calm down. And when these calm down, then there is no suffering, and so the mind abides just as it is, peaceful and happy.
Shinete do gonde tene namdo ke lot mayua namdo ke tene gujo jamarba tene tengala netana tene te shine chagyores tele pendo chi shubayina ngaransun chume yoroban chume te ta longmi na chume te ya pari ya bayana me te ko ta de ke yoren gujo san ja ke yomare me te ta de ke doa long living one na met in Gjoja. Tang hagi Hine Yapoji Gom Shiwayana, Hine Yapoji Gom Tukuyona. Ta long me Mamina yes, Lumi Yoami by yes. Same day, Namdo Gjoja Maraba. Namdo Kanyang Majeva. Namdo Kanyang J Maraba. Same day, then Tena. Netaba tani chagayore. Ta hine te gom marabayina ta mamela tani long poyona gujo jabanayi tani ngage hine gom de tani namdo je tani zonde tani semden guyong yorwa semden guyong yores tani chayongayina ta hine chagayo mare namdo ko yoyong yores. Then the Hine Hibadita, Namto Yomaraba, Namto J Maraba. Then on the Netaba, that the Shing is, the Nugu is, though the Namto Gujoka and Yamara, Namto Yomaraba. Then it Tabata, Hine, the Gomiala let Lao Yomaris. Karisina, Tangan the Jiva, Toma Mibane. Then it led a number of Toba, Dick, Jisen down, and then it take a Bakatang. 박차다 되게 중데 다다 데데 요래 되는데 남도 돈 초반나 이용 용그 요래스 남도 돈 초반나 이용 요래 다 되는데 되네 희네데 저 야보지 곤트비알라 되네 탑시 가르치기 요래스나 되네 탑시 남바 니게 고니 되네 희네 고미알라 메서치기 요래스
So shamatha is when a meditation, or peaceful abiding is when you are able to abide without being moved or stirred in any way by thoughts. So there are no thoughts that arise. For example, it is like a butter lamp, like a candle flame, where that is in a still place, a windless place. So when there is no wind, then the flame will be still and will not move. When wind comes, the flame will begin to flicker and move. So when you practice shamatha, or the peaceful abiding well, the mind should be like an unmoved candle flame without wind, in a windless place, in a still place. So it is a mind that is not moved by any thoughts. So there are no thoughts arising, a completely still mind. And then it is the abiding aspect of the peaceful abiding is to sustain this state, to continuously remain within this state. If we do not practice shamatha well, then it is like putting the candle flame into the wind, and it will move. And then many thoughts arise, they will stir the mind. And then our meditation is not actually shamatha meditation. So shamatha meditation is when the mind abides without any movement of thoughts, when no thoughts stir the mind, and you're able to sustain this state, this non-conceptual state. And then, of course, that is not easy. It is not easy to practice shamatha, because since beginningless time, from lifetime to lifetime, we have habituated to following our various thoughts, to our way of thinking, and these habitual imprints as a continuum are still present, it still remains. And because of that, thoughts always arise, like dust particles in the space. And so to cultivate a perfect shamatha, there are two methods, two types of shamatha to cultivate.
Tinida Shenede Tambol Narange, the Yamni Singo on the Tini Tara Shenede Latini, Shene Tinki Ta, Timi Sene Nishi Younger. Ta Tambo Shene Tinki Tela Jagger. Shene Tinki Tela Jan Ditini Ta Yurti Latini and Sheneji Tapichiota. Then the top penna, you'll continue to think yourself. Penna, Narans, Nagan, don't the metotella, Narankta. Metotella, tan, same mayanwache, same mayanwache, metotella, ta. Metotella time, metotella, Kadokama, you last of the Rikitapi, Kayan Chigo, Yomari. Kona same tell a day, the same tell a ten, metotella ten, Gujo Kayan Majabachene. Gujo Kayan Majabachene. Te tena tene semte nene, mikpa tela tene tene semte neya, tene tabichi yores. Tene tandrik mikpa zone tene semte nene, mikpa tene dendu, tene ngarang semte yang, gujo jaga yomarila, make it zate yang gujo jaga yomare. Tegarana ne tubu yores. Ta te karesina, ngarang suchi, nyomo ba namto shukimbo yuza, tene semte ne marandu, ta ngage. Ropachi Zavana Yirita, Ropa Zavanan, Ropa Tini Chingananke, Jala Ji Chimbo Kukuyuna, Ta Ropachi Yuna Chalkuna Kule Laurua, Petinai, Nanaki, your teletine, didn't a same the net up Zandu, didn't send net to Yella Pinto Yungures. Then didn't Nanka Mikti, Mikputi, Ta Meton Rola, same tene, didn't it in a negures. Telechi Mikputi Telata, Zuta, Kado Yip Chepa Kanyuma, kind of Chitinanga Mikpa, Tini Penna Cup, Penna Te. Jala Lankor, the Yanang Temdo, the Jala Ngupo Kandiji let me quite it same thing, never tap Zanaya, Drikung. Kakigan, Lako, like a cut in an answer with an dungeon and color, like a gone, tell it in make part in here, decay. Don't not at it, body, don't target any body, send the net up, consacrates.
So first, when we begin with shamatha practice, so first there are two types of shamatha. There is the shamatha with a support and shamatha without a support. And first we train in the shamatha with a support. And that means we are using an object as a support for our shamatha practice. So for example, you can place a flower, for example, in front of you, and then you direct your gaze to the flower, and then you remain there single-pointedly without distraction. And while you gaze at the flower, you don't think about the flower's quality. So you don't think about the color and the shape, the parts of the flower at all. You just use it as a support to fix your mind and your gaze. So you only stay there with your mind without any movement. And then you continue to remain within that state, within your mind, without allowing anything else to arise, without any stirring. And then when that is very single point, that even the eyes will not flicker anymore or blink. And so normally because we have a lot of strong afflictive emotions and thoughts, the mind can never abide still. So we need some support. So it is just like you want to transport something heavy somewhere, you need some help, you look for support, then it's easier. So in the same way, we need some help in the beginning, a support. And so this object that we focus on is our support. For example, it's a flower, but it could be other things too. For example, it could be a cup, or it could be a prayer wheel, it could be a book, a flower, whatever. And some people even also use the image of the deity. For example, you can visualize the form of the deity in the space in front of you. So all of these are the same in that they are different methods to make the mind abide still.
Tini nawa ke dra tende tini ngarang ke dra mada romondra mada romonyimpo tende tang tini tela semte ne dra tela semte ne tini yang semte ne thap chana yan dige yores ta dra ta ngarang so zok karela tini nga ke semte ne thap ko yona ya tini chikpa chikjang cha ke yore ten dige yores tela ta chene tin chin yele tini ngarang sen ne thap cha ke yores ta te ngarang so le tambo pala
So here in the shamatha with the support, you have the mind abide still on reliance on reliance of a support, independence of a support, like an outer object. And so, for example, we can use an object of the eyes, of the sight, a form that we can use as a support, but also likewise we can use any other of the sense impressions. For example, the sound that we perceive with our ears. You can also, for example, focus single-pointedly on some instruments or some pleasant sound, and have the mind stay there single-pointedly. And if the mind remains single-pointedly, it is also a suitable shamatha support, or even smell or any of the other sense pleasures. Whichever support causes your mind to abide, it will become a support of shamatha. And then if it causes your mind to abide, then they all have the same purpose. They're all suitable. So this shamatha that uses an object of focus is then called the shamatha with a support, and this is how a beginning practitioner begins to practice shamatha.
Ta chene timi sean sadu ta tinji de ngag yabo gomshi se tini timi pas ta ngara yolla matimba ngara rantop gutini ta gomjat bya telatini chene timi laboyore Pena ngaranso chala ji chimbo ji khogu yo na ta ngana zupo yapo tangne jomda yapo chene tini ngana ke chala de yapo khurtbya yimba roba chi magowa roba tsar magowa ngana ke khurtba na yin ke ta ngana ke tini ranto ko tini gom jatba ta tele chene timi se ta gom se ansa de ta ngana so chene goyong gore chene se tini semte sem ke tini namto tham 제 남도 탐지를 잘와 생각 넘버도 뭐 탐지를 잘와 되니 대다 남도 탐지를 잘하나 센디 쇼와 차대요 센디 쇼와 가래셔리 뇨몬 발에 쇼용아 넘버도 발에 쇼용아 된데 때나 되니 텔레 쇼와 대 때나 되니 네트 바텔다 신에스 다 telang아서 곰 신에 곰세야 다 드리지 시겨 지 곰 센스도 지 ngaran zugda troresa o khado ye laso ba tende ke ganyang gomgo yo ma res tene semde namdo me pangala net ba ta dela tene shine gomba se ta tende sungu ye sares ta de zong ngaran ge be zor se tene gomyang jap tende je wa ina tene ko shine de yapo gon ta ba chanyang gore shine de yapo gon ta ba chong ina tene ngala ranging ke semtele shibde papep tene yong ge yore tene je nyomo ba nabar to batam je ma chung no yore kora shene ke top tene yong ge yore es.
And so then once you have cultivated, habituated well such a shamatha with a support, then you move to the second type of shamatha, which is without a support. And so then here you do not rely on any kind of object as an object of focus. You only meditate with resting in your own mind without any other object. For example, if you have exercised after a while of carrying around heavy things, you become trained, and then eventually one day you don't need a help anymore, you don't need a support anymore, you can carry it on your own. And so in the same way, if you have trained well in the shamatha with support, one day your mind will become trained and you can practice the shamatha without a support. And that is then a meditation state that is a complete absence of thoughts, a peaceful state, and there are no afflictions. Afflictions are pacified, thoughts are pacified. And you continue to remain within this peaceful state, this concept-free state. And that is the practice of peaceful abiding. And so here, without a support, you do not need to rely on any sensation, any object, any shape or sound or any kind of form. You only rest within the thought-free, natural state of the mind, and you continue to remain within this state peacefully. So first we need to make an effort in practicing again and again, and if then the shamatha practice becomes well, you really have trained well in shamatha practice, then at some point the mind will just naturally abide in its peaceful and joyful state, which is completely at ease, and then just naturally all the afflicted thoughts will diminish. Question? We already had 20 minutes of instructions.
Tini ngaran so ta gom jang de tara ta le tambo ba te ke shene gom ko yore shene te ke ne kap ke nyom ba go tu ko yore ne kap ko dunga le shet ko yore marto tarto ko dewa top ko yamares tarto ko dewa top gona semche nelong 통고 yores semche nelong tongwar hibala tambo shene ya pogom teni te teni ta teni semche sartong sene teni sarvata tongba ta so sar tong tene tene gomjaya na besosine tene ta nyomupa jotan chepa tani pangtopa tene ngaye yone tene 타토게 dimba topo yores mato cheneke 타토게 dimba topo yo mare yene ya ta chenede yapo gom popa yena tene nekapke dewa tang nekapke dongha te da tangi panglo yores shetopo yores.
So when we practice shamatha, the benefit of practicing shamatha is that temporarily our afflicted states of mind are pacified, and therefore temporarily we also pacify suffering. But we still, only depending on shamatha, we still have not found the ultimate happiness, a lasting happiness. In order to find the ultimate lasting happiness, we need to see the nature of the mind, realize the nature of the mind. But in order also to realize the nature of the mind, we first must cultivate shamatha, peaceful abiding. And then once that is cultivated, then we also need to practice the aspect of clarity. And so then we make an effort in practicing that union of clarity and emptiness. And then ultimately we will be able to uproot entirely all the bases of affliction. So ultimately, from the ultimate perspective, only the practice of shamatha will not lead to the ultimate state of lasting happiness or enlightenment. So it is only a method to temporarily calm down our temporary various thoughts of happiness and suffering.
Wa mona so yene inchi tena tema goba te tema chiba ge jablo dine seka tere to tini chukchik te
Cheka chipo
cheka datan konde te katsan to mo da ten to da
cheka kunje komare
ina le mo te
ni korwa
be nya ko
ti komare
gore tini ina ro ko da
ti samara tisum
tesum tini e ma ho ten do ko
Pöge. Inchi pöge.
Inchi ten lo interest.
Inchi chipo. So we will do page 9, 10, 11, and then the prayer for Dewa Chen in English on page 16. First page 9. Dorzin Chang, Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Dharmas of Gampopa, Mahamudra and Lord Drikung. Please bestow upon us the most auspicious blessing of all the Kagyu Lamas. By this virtue may I achieve omniscience, by defeating all enemies' confusion. May all who travel on the waves of birth, old age, sickness and death cross the ocean of samsara. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. I pray that the Lama may have good health. I pray that the Lama may have long life. I pray that your Dharma activities spread far and wide. I pray that I may not be separated from you. As Manjushri, the warrior, realized the ultimate state, and as did Samantabhadra, I will follow in their path and fully dedicate all the merit for all sentient beings. By the blessing of the Buddha who attained the three kayas, by the blessing of the truth of the unchanging Dharma as such, by the blessing of the indivisible Sangha order, may the merit I share bear fruit. By the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Drikung Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara. Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind, root, and lineage lamas, divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, yogins, yoginis, and dakinis, dwelling in the 10 directions, please hear my prayer. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May thoughts of fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind as such, and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I in any case gain the supreme attainment of mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo. Then 16. Emma home. In the center is the marvelous Buddha Amitabha of boundless light. On the right side is the Lord of great compassion, and on the left is Vajrapani, the Lord of powerful means. All are surrounded by limitless Buddhas and bodhisattvas. Immeasurable peace and happiness is the blissful pure land of Devachan. When I and all beings pass from samsara, may we be born there without taking samsaric rebirth. May I have the blessing of meeting Amitabha face to face. By the power and blessings of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, may we attain his aspiration without hindrance. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn may it arise, where it is born may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.
Om Mani Padme Hum Ru. Om Mani Padme Hum Ru. Om Mani Padme Hum Ru. Om Mani Thank you very much, everyone.